So welcome to Marriage 2.0. Actually, most marriage conferences, well, their goal is kind of to create an accessible way for people to, engage dynamics of their marriage. Hey, doc, give us a few pointers for growing, la, la, la. And that's what I do mostly with my conferences. And I think that's great. And that's what we did in 2018. But that's not what I do at the office. All right? That's not what my real life is like, in case you wonder. In my real life, people are hurting and people are hurtful and they are angry and they are hopeless and they have emotional injuries and they're emotionally injuring each other, and that bleeds over into their marriages. So I decided to create a conference years back for professionals, actually, for pastors, for presbyteries, for RUF leaders, for other therapists, of sort of a deeper, gnarlier look at how marriage works. And that's how I started doing this conference. So then somehow one day, some church talked me into doing it at their church. And so with a lot of warning, I'm like, look, this is a lot heavier. We did Marriage 2.0. And in it, I'm going to try to really capture for you how a real therapist thinks about real marriage. We're going to look at the hard stuff. This is why I pushed you to go back and listen to the original conference if you haven't been there, if you weren't there in 2018, because it's like I told leadership. I'm going to be kind of teaching you acrobatic flying, okay? And if you haven't learned to land and take off, you're going to be going like, dude, all right? So if 2018 is freshman year, this is kind of graduate level, okay? So, welcome. And now that's good news and it's bad news, all right? The bad news is that I'm going to be pushing you, okay? I'm going to teach you how I really think about marriages. So it'll be challenging in that sense. Like if one of you tried to teach me, pediatrics or accounting, so gird up your loins in that sense, right? But the good news is that I'm going to teach you how I really think. If you ever think like, what does a marriage therapist think when he approaches a situation? I mean, what I've been doing most of my life, wow, is trying to make messy marriages better. I actually started doing marriage therapy before I got married. You can imagine how amazing my insights were, It's like, I had the same problem when I took this girl out last night, whatever. But anyway, I'm going to talk to you about how I have worked with marriages. So instead of talking about the stuff that we usually talk about in marriage conferences, though during Q&A, we're going to blow it wide open. You can ask me any question about anything in marriage. Instead of going with just lightweight, if you're kind of tall enough to ride this ride, right, we're going to look at some things I haven't really heard other people addressing that I think are deeply important in marriages. So welcome to John's Marriage Conference on steroids, all right? Marriage 501, all right? Let me tell you what we're going to do this weekend. First tonight, we're going to talk about baggage. And you know what I mean by that. You know how we all bring a ton of our own unresolved, like, needs or fears or longings or issues or whatever from our childhood, etc., into our marriages, right? If you don't know that, then I'm really glad you're here because it's happening, all right, in the background. One of the major reasons that we have marriage issues is because you and your spouse are both stepping over each other's little kid baggage all the time. It's actually why you fight. And so firstly here tonight, I want to make sense of the baggage that we have in our marriages and maybe insulate your marriage some from the fact that, you're really just mad at your mom, or my dad used to criticize me, so I go ballistic when you point out my flaws, whatever like that. Sound familiar? We got a regular crowd here, Frankly, all you need to fix your marriage, you don't need marriage therapy. What you need is, I was watching Men in Black the other night. You know that? And that neuralizer, if we could just go look, like that and erase all your childhood stuff, it'd be like, you're done with therapy, whatever. All right, secondly, tomorrow, last marriage conference, we talked about basic conflict, all right? But predicated on that, implicit in that, was the assumption that you were both on board. okay? We talked about resolving fights and disagreements and coming to win-win solutions and dealing with hurts. But we assumed in that both of you care, that both of you are saying, hey, Doc, we keep fighting. Help us get better at that, okay? In other words, biblically speaking, you were what we call repentant, which is going to be a big theme for us this weekend, all right? You wanted to do better. This year, we're going to look at something that's sort of a pet project of mine. This is one of my favorite talks, by the way. And those of you who are listening to my podcast, it is the #1 downloaded podcast on my podcast by twofold, all right? Anyway, it's something I found to be amazingly powerful and incredibly necessary in about half of the marriages that I deal with. I've never heard anybody talk about it, and it is, how do you deal with conflict with somebody who doesn't care? When they're jerks and they're kind of not interested in growing. What do you do then, you know? Half the marriages I deal with are one spouse who comes to see me and like, yeah, they're at home going, there's a bunch of psychobabble, you know, and like, what do we do? All right? How do we engage them? How do we survive them? But also we're going to talk about, how do we save them? How do we help them? So now we'll take a break, a brief break. Let's see. Okay. I think I can find where I was in my notes, too. See, when you get old and your eyes get bad, you have to print in like a 18 font, which makes I swear my talk is not this long, okay? It's like every 2 seconds I'm going to be, all right? I'm going to keep freestyling. How do you engage people who are like being jerky and they're not interested in really changing? And the fun thing is, I use this stuff in everyday life. You can apply to, this isn't just going to be for your marriage. It'll apply to, you know, your in-laws. It'll apply at work. It'll apply to your kids. It'll apply to your snarky teenagers. It's sort of a floor cleaner and a dessert topping. You know, that old joke? Anyway. The topic is difficult people, how to deal with difficult people, and how to deal with regular people like us when we're just sort of, you know, being crabby, grumpy pants and taking it out on you today. Because we're all jerky and difficult and unrepentant sometime, right? So come tomorrow and watch the fun unfold. I mean, if this hasn't already been fun enough, right? All right, finally tomorrow we will unpack forgiveness. Another strangely underdeveloped topic within Christian circles, despite the fact that it's so very central to our faith. How do we forgive? Why should we forgive? Are there any times when you shouldn't forgive? What if the perp doesn't care? What about reconciliation versus forgiveness? All right? I find forgiveness to be this incredibly nuanced and sophisticated and subtle sort of process, but most people who I interact with, most Christians are sort of like, well, you're just supposed to forgive them, right? And that's kind of it, you know. Let's try to broaden that a little bit. How about it, okay? Again, that will be applicable to your romantic relationship, but to life in general, all right? So that's our weekend. So if you want lightweight, run away, be free. I won't look, go, okay? But if you want the real guts of how marriages work and some of the gnarly stuff I deal with in the office, you come to the right place. Let's get going. We're going to talk about baggage tonight. Here's where we're going with this. I'll tell you a story, all right? I saw this couple once, and they were in a lot of conflict, and it seemed like all the time they were having these little back and forth tiffs, and they would explode into something that sort of was like way out of proportion, all right? So they're telling me about these things that go on in their relationship, and my job is kind of like being a detective. You sort of listen for clues, and you look for tips, you know, you listen for history, like you look for evidence. Anyway, as I started learning about their history more, one of the things I learned about him was that his dad was always like on his case, was always kind of like, you're going to never measure up, boy, kind of one of those guys, was always kind of critical of him, was always kind of disappointed in him, and that left him in a painful place in his heart. kind of this painful insecurity about power and about goodness, okay? 1001, 1002, and then he gets married, okay? And guess what? They can be hanging out 30 years later and having a conversation, and his wife starts talking about her friend who's married to this guy who makes zillions of dollars, and they have a condo in Cabo, and they're going to Paris next year again, all right? Doesn't that sound great? And he goes off. What? Nothing's ever good enough for you. Why don't you get a job if you want more money? Blah, 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 blah. And you can imagine how the rest of their evening turned out, right? Now, let me ask you, could there be any relationship between these two stories? Between the story about his dad and the story about his wife? You don't need to be like, Sherlock to figure out that he's experiencing her story through the ears of his history story, all right? And we all do this. It's one of the biggest dynamics in a marriage that we all have these backstories and going on from our own histories, and they infiltrate our marriage. And I want tonight to try to give you some traction for decontaminating your marriage from that, all right? So I want to look at the baggage we have and the ways we can categorize it and some ways we can learn to catch it and listen for it and some things we can do to push back on it. So welcome to Baggage Claim, all right? Now, as you remember from 2018, the now legendary Finders Keepers Conference, here's how I think about humans and why we get symptoms or why we get depressed or anxious or why we have relationship problems or whatever like that. What I said was that basically marriage and life and our spirituality, our relationship with God, all requires what I call software that we need to learn in relationships in our hearts. And we're not born with that software, and we have to develop it in our relationships with other people. And those same little hearts are needing something. They're longing for something, to be connected, to matter. And God made humans to need not only someone to teach them the abilities to do life, but also to meet some of those longings we have to matter or to feel safe. And he created us to need that kind of nourishment. And if we don't get it, we'll bear fruit of that. We'll feel it as an owie in our life somewhere or in our relationships. It's like if you didn't get vitamin C, you'd get scurvy, all right? Think about it. Think about your job. In order to do your job, you need to have been given, you need to have been taught the ability to be creative, the ability to fail, the ability to deny gratification. Those are abilities that a lot of people don't have. To be a friend, you have to have had relationships in which someone helped you learn that closeness with another person is good. And you know what else? You can be close to another person and still get to be you and still get to be free. Wow. We have to learn that. To be a parent, you have to have the tools taught to you somewhere in relationships to be tender, but also be firm and set good limits and manage your own impulses and not run out of the house screaming, okay? And to be married, you have to be taught all of this stuff, right? So good luck with that. That's one of the reasons my first book was a parenting book, by the way, because the parenting book oriented toward we're laying the foundation for what kids need to be functional adults. By the way, that reminds me, a little off track here. This church in 2019 was the first place in my life I ever sold any of my parenting books. They came in the mail Thursday. I flew here Friday, and you guys bought them for the first time. They're probably worth a lot, yeah. All right, so here's the plot point. You get it. We need the software to work. Is this sounding familiar? And if we hit real life without some of this software, and all of us do, all of us are missing some of this. You know the old joke, if you think mama's crazy, you should have met grandma, okay? We all have missing pieces, all right? And when we're missing those pieces, we're going to find ourselves struggling to do stuff that marriage requires, like be close or be powerful or manage my emotional world or we will feel a longing inside for something that God created us to have met that's not met, and we will try to seek it, sometimes in destructive ways, okay? And what we said was that was the real problem in our lives and in our marriages, and that's what creates symptoms. That there's a sense in which you could say nobody's the bad guy. We're just all driving around cars in which maybe your steering wheel is broken and my brakes are broken, so we're always running into each other. Is that sounding familiar? Another way of saying this is that little kids, all of us starting out life, walk around asking what I call core questions of the universe, of the people closest to us, of our inner circle, of our parents, whatever. And at some level, overtly or covertly or kind of tacitly, we're asking kind of questions about the world, like, how does the world work? Like, does how I feel matter? Is it safe for me to like struggle? Do you want real me or kind of just good boy me? Can you give me kind of a vibe for that? Is failing a big deal? Kind of what are the rules here, man? And in our families, we kind of pick up this vibe for what that is. They're kind of core questions. And as we get answers to those core questions, it's like you're a little kid and you're wondering, how big a deal is it if you mess up? Well, then you see dad screaming at the waitress for messing up your order, and you go, noted. Okay, follow that. Double click the favorites. Messing up's not, so we're getting these answers, right? And what happens is, in that process, we're building this collection of expectations and of longings and of needs and of kookiness. And here's the secret of the universe, number one for today. That collection of core question answers, that's what you're marrying in your spouse. All right? In other words, when you get married, you are marrying your spouse's collection of answers to those core questions, of software and missing pieces. That's who you said I do to, all right? Anyway, last conference, we categorized that software into 4 I's. Remember that? Intimacy, about being close. Identity, about having a sense of self and some power, that I can let you be you and I can be me. Imperfection, in other words, making sense of shame or failure, not being critical. Impulse control, can I manage my emotions without exploding? And the 5th I call inability, which is the recognition that I'm unable, the recognition that I'm as messed up as you are at least, okay? And that was sort of our grid for how our software works. So let's look at these, just breeze through them quick and remind you a little bit. Your wife wants intimacy. She wants to have some time with you, just the two of you. So you go out to dinner, and she looks at you. Ladies, you look at him, and you say, honey, what are you thinking right now? And you're hoping he's going to say something like, just that I've got everything I need right here. But instead, if you're married to a dude, he's going to say, I was just thinking, pigs are really big. They're like, you could ride one if you ever thought about that, and now that's not because he's a bad guy or something. It's because maybe he didn't learn that ability, that first I of being emotionally connected. We learn connection. We learn relational, emotional connection like we learn to tie our shoes, okay? And if no one taught us, no one taught us. Good. All right, second one, identity software. Maybe your spouse has lots of opinions and they're not afraid to share them. As Norma says to me sometimes, no, tell me what you really think, John, all right? But let's say you never learned the ability to say no or to push back or to be you or to exist. So pretty soon you start to feel real pushed around in your marriage. And as we said in 2018, that isn't necessarily a marriage problem. That might be a you not having a sense of you problem, okay? Missing software, or imperfection, or impulse control. We'll talk more about these. On and on, we got baggage. Now, the best news is that because of that, nobody's the bad guy. It's not you married the wrong person or your spouse is a jerk. The problem is that you're both missing software, and we can learn it. We can learn the software. Does that sound familiar? So, our question for this year. What's going to happen when these two baggage handlers meet? What's going to happen when your baggage meets my baggage, when your stuff meets my stuff, when your inner child or inner Godzilla, whatever, meets mine, all right? It's one of the biggest dynamics in marriage. It's behind number one problem of most of the marriages I deal with. It's the primary way in which I think about doing marriage therapy, and I want you to understand it. So we all have these blind spots. We all have these software pieces that are missing, and then we get married, and what's going to happen? What are we going to do there? We're going to do one of two things, or we're actually going to do two of two things if you're like me. We're going to look to our spouse to finally, ultimately meet that unfulfilled need, or our spouse is going to trigger that unfulfilled need. They're going to stomp all over it, okay? Let's look at them. Number one, we're going to want our spouse to finally meet that need. Something in us will, if we feel a missing piece, if we feel an injury, something in us will inexorably reach for and long for our spouse to finally meet that need. As one of my clients told me a while back, after doing a little bit of work, she said, I realized after some honesty with myself that I wasn't looking for a romantic relationship. At some level, I was looking for a healing relationship. She said this about her marriage. Another one said to me, I realized I always wanted this one hole in me filled by this one person who would choose me. Or this dude told me, he said, I wanted someone who would finally be happy with me, who would think I was enough. Do you hear it? They're searching. And I want you to get this and put this in your marriages together. They're searching, and we all do this, searching for some part of us that is longing or hurting to finally get unhurt by somebody who gets it. If you try it on and think about it this way, it should create some compassion for you and your spouse. Your spouse isn't out just to make you miserable. They didn't get up this morning saying, how can I tick them off today? They are hurting and they are longing, and so are you. And tonight is to help build a category for that for y'all together. Because I think if we're honest, if we just scratch the body pain a little bit, if we just look below the baseline of most conflicts, we are longing or we are hurt or there is a need that we're wanting to have seen to finally be fulfilled, okay? To be enough. And we will live, all of us will do this, we will live trying to get that from our marriage. Maybe this will be my chance. Maybe this will be the chance to get that intimacy I didn't get, or that freedom, or that respect. And we're all longing for this in our marriage. Your spouse isn't just distant or mean. They are searching for something and longing for something. And here's where it gets sadder. That when we take the weight of our own history and our own injuries or our own needs that aren't resolved and we load them into our marriages, it overloads our marriages. And marriages can't bear that. We'll explain why later on. And marriages aren't able to meet them. And it kind of blows up. And that's behind most of our fights. More on that later. The second thing we can do when we bring this baggage to our relationships is our spouse is going to trigger it. In other words, it's going to be like that thumb that you have where you have a cut on, and every time you walk through a doorway, you hit it on that same thumb. You know that feeling? In other words, not only are they not going to meet that need, they're going to step on it, okay? Kind of like the girl who wanted the condo in Cabo did for the guy. She accidentally stepped right into his injury, okay? What does that sound like? How do we step on each other? Let's talk about a baggage dance. So, let's say wife grows up in a family in which there's not a lot of real connection. Maybe her father's kind of distant. And so she has this kind of longing, this kind of lifetime longing to be seen. Like she wants real intimacy and connection. Problem is, her husband's family didn't get into the whole close in connection thing, you know. They were more like, on the contrary, they had a loud vibe of, in our family, you know, you perform, you know, you're amazing and you impress everybody and you surpass everything. So he doesn't have any idea about emotional connection, all right? He just kind of wants to be the man and for her to think so, right? So here we go with the dance. Do you remember dances from the first conference? She reaches out to him with a longing. I need this, or I'm afraid of that, or I'm really sad about this. And he doesn't know what to do with it. And he kind of struggles. And that starts to scare her. Then it starts to make her angry. So she starts to express how injured and angry she feels about that and say things like, living with you is so lonely, and saying these negative things to him. Now remember the dance? What's he going to do once he hears that? All of a sudden he feels like, oh my gosh, she's unhappy with me. Remember, what he needs more than anything is for you to be happy with me. She's unhappy. And so he starts to push back and go, nothing's ever good enough for you. And then she realizes he's mad and is even further away than he was earlier, so she's more distant from him, and they intensify and intensify. And he's like, well, why don't you go watch Gilmore Girls if you want more, you know, emotional, touchy-feely stuff. You know, and it's like they go back and forth, and they do this dance. You know, does that sound familiar? The old approacher-avoider dance that's kind of a classic. Now, why are they doing this? Because they don't love each other? No, because his inability to be emotionally close, missing that software, that baggage, scared her. It scared little kid her, all right? And her saying, I'm angry or hurt, disappointed in you, scared his little boy part that wants to be cool. He wants her to think he's amazing. So they're stepping on each other's injuries. We do this all the time. Now, sure, they can talk that out, and we can do communication training on that. That was kind of what we did more last conference. But the weight of this problem, the weight of their issue, is not coming from some communication problem. It's coming from the hurts and the longings and the fears that they brought to the altar, baby. All right? So that's where we're going to go tonight, or where we are going tonight. I want you to learn to recognize that this is going on in your marriage so it doesn't contaminate your interactions, and you're going to be wondering why everything is becoming such a big deal, all right? So we all have pathology and injuries and needs and whatever, and we do them in our marriage, right? Remember the old fortune cookie joke? You will have fame and fortune in bed. Remember? You will have worldwide acclaim in bed. You know, you say in bed at the end. Y'all ever do that? Maybe it's a Mississippi thing. I don't know. Well, you'll do your pathology and your mental illness in your marriage. And in bed too, but that's another show. We're not going to go there, you know. But I want you to have this category and learn to think about it like this, because this is in the background of both of you. Because if we can see this, then this can become the enemy instead of your spouse. I want you both being able to back up by the end of the evening and go, wait a minute, this is really the issue. It's not you, it's the stuff, all right? The problem is not communication skills. I can communicate that I hate your guts very well. Thank you very much, okay? The problem is we have aliens living inside of us. 5-year-old aliens. Y'all remember this from the last conference? I tell people there's 4 people in every marriage. There's big you and there's big her. And there's little you and there's little her. Now, big you and big her get along pretty well. Y'all would be fine if it was just you guys. It's these little kids who are messing everything up. So you come in from work and you smell meatloaf and you go, oh, meatloaf again. Now, if she heard that, that'd probably be okay, all right? But that's not who hears it. Little her hears it. Like, oh, meatloaf again. And she says, oh, really? Well, if you want to cook supper, you can cook your own supper. Which big you could probably hear okay, but that's not who hears it. Little you hears it. She doesn't appreciate how hard I've been working all day. And he's like, well, tell you what, if you just lived today in my shoes, you wouldn't be complaining. And she's like, oh, yeah, and then they're off to the races, okay? Now, the 2 big people get along just fine. That's who's sitting here, all right? Welcome. Now, I want you to all shake hands with your little square, all right? Because you all got this little square inside, and that's the culprit. That's the enemy, all right? That's where I want to go this evening. By the way, if you've heard me say this before or do this example before, I always have to tell this joke because I think it's so funny. The first time I ever did this, I wasn't thinking, and I accidentally used circles. And I had a giant 8th grade boy joke up here in the church. So these are squares, okay? They're squares, people, not circles, all right? Here's another way of putting it. Most marriages are like two people, both of whom have kind of half-empty lunch boxes, all right? And we have some stuff in my lunchbox, but I'm needing a lot of stuff too. So then I meet little Susie Q over there. Man, does she look good? And is that a good-looking lunchbox or what, all right? And she's going to fill me up with all these needs I have for respect and kind of admiration, you know, and it's going to make me feel so good about myself. And when you're dating, it actually is that way, right? She's full of that affirmation. She's like, oh, really? You lay shoes for a living? That's fascinating. You know, and that's kind of how it is initially, right? Anyway, at some level you're thinking, I bet she can help fill up this lunchbox of mine, all right? Only problem is, and this never occurs to us for some reason, is she's thinking the same thing. She's going, oh, he's mighty cute. That's a mighty nice looking lunchbox he's got. And this is going to be like Etta James. Ella. My love is, you know, and she's like, this is it. He's the one. He's going to hear all my feelings and affirm me and hear me talk about my mom and how I'm mad at my friend. And when you're dating, he does, right? We do, right, guys? And we write poems. Written any poems lately, guys? You know? Now, of course, what's going to happen is that couple's going to get married, and what's going to happen? After the ceremony, he's going to say, okay, we're married. Now you can begin filling my lunchbox the rest of the way up with all the yummy goodies that I need for affirmation and approval, and you think I'm amazing. Meet my needs, baby. You know, let the fulfillment begin. And she's like, wait a minute. Must have missed something. I thought you were going to fill me up. And besides, I only have half a lunchbox here. And if I fill yours up, I'm going to have an empty lunchbox. So crying out loud, okay? And he's like, I thought marriage was supposed to meet needs. And she's like, yeah, so get busy, buddy, all right? And they're both coming to the table needful. They're both coming to the table with this emotional hunger. And they're both walking away angry and needful. And they have a phenomenon that in Mississippi we call 2 ticks and no dog. But here's the truth. Big Hugh and Big Her probably get along just fine. It's these little kids who are the problem in a relationship. And one of the most powerful things you can do, and my goal tonight, is to let the fact that you both have needful 5-year-olds living inside of you become a very conscious part of your marriage. So good news again, nobody's the bad guy. Our injuries, our insecurities, our vulnerabilities are the bad guy, and we live them out on each other, and you're both victims of this enemy. I was talking to somebody like a month ago in the office. I said, so the point, they were kind of getting it as a couple. They were like going, well, we're both kind of screwed up and we take that out on each other. I'm like, yeah. It's not like who's the bad guy. It's like we're all a mess. So I want you all to be friends about it. Broken, fallen friends. And the wife looks at me and she goes, BFFs. So I hereby redefine what BFF means. Broken, fallen friend, all right? Now, here, guess what? And here's where it starts to get cool. Yeah. If you're getting what I'm saying, if you start to capture this thing that I kind of have this messed up little kid junk inside of me, and so do you, and you both start to realize that and stop fighting each other and start to understand that, we together, the BFFs, actually can fill up those lunch boxes once we stop fighting, once we see what we're doing. This is where we're going. Preview of coming attractions, okay? So I want to develop this a little bit more by playing with our categories or 4 eyes, because the trick is catching it. The trick is getting a little bit of practice of when is this on my garbage and some of my reactivity and some of my little kid stuff, and learning to kind of develop an ear for it, a palate for it. So I'm going to give you some examples, and we can do more in Q&A if you want, but the trick is how to spot it and catch it and being able to say, I think this is baggage, instead of, you don't appreciate me, okay? You feel the difference in those two, by the way? Just spotting it can transform your relationship. All right, so let's use the 4 I's. Intimacy. Remember, this is about let you in, keep you in. Can I be open and connected? Can I make sense of love? Can I feel secure in your love? Can I feel grounded in it? Can I be close to you? God created us to where we need emotional connection, relational connection. It's kind of our fuel. So if we have some missing pieces in the intimacy group, it doesn't have to be some kind of emotional trauma or anything. It's just like maybe we reached out, but nobody reached back. It can be as simple and as subtle as that. It's going to leave a longing. God made it to. It's going to leave a longing that we're going to be looking for somebody to fill. So what's that going to look like? Well, here's an example about me, an intimacy issue. Years ago, Norma wrote a book. She wrote a book before I ever wrote a book. Of course, she never reminds me of that. But the kids were little at the time, and so her life was being a mom, taking care of the kids, cooking supper, cleaning the house, and then after the kids were down, she would start working on her book. And she would work on her book till about 1 in the morning. And we did that for a season. Now, remember, at this point in my life, I still had some work to do on the whole, can I let you in, can I keep you in, love, intimacy, security thing. Something in my software had this sort of hurt insecurity piece going. I mean, by my calculation, y'all just heard my story. By my calculation, let's see, housework, children, book. Best case scenario, I'm 4th on her priority list here at that point, all right? So that starts kicking up this little kid in me. Like, am I a priority? Like, do you even want me? I mean, like, basically getting my feelings hurt. And, God saying kind of like, God, some marriage here, right? So naturally, I began trying to woo her back by whining and criticizing her about it, You don't even care. I'm not important to you. Like, chicks dig that, right? That's a cool thing. Anyway, anything but asking for what I needed in an adult way, like, hey, could we carve out some time? Like, this schedule's kind of not working. But do you hear my urgency? Do you hear my intensity? Do you hear how it started really pushing my buttons? That's your tell, all right? That's what we're going to be looking for. Now, fortunately, at that point in my life, I was still in therapy. And I was telling my therapist about this, and she kindly pointed out that, John, if you think about it, I'm not sure this is the first time you've ever felt that feeling. If you'll reflect on your background and your history a little bit. And I had to kind of make sense of some of my own missing pieces there. Like what was my real core question? This wasn't about Norma. This is a core question about, am I wanted? Am I a priority? Do you feel it? Do you feel the difference? What did I do with her love? What did I do with trusting her connection to me in the midst of all the things that were going on in her life? What did I do with my own strength, by the way? My sense of me apart from her. What did I do with my body of Christ people, other places? What did I do with that, Mr. Needy Pants? What did I do? So I needed to heal actually some unanswered core questions about trust and love instead of taking that out on her. Now, could she and I work some more to do some adult kind of growth there? Sure. Yeah, carve out some time. But that wasn't my core issue. It was too intense. It was too needy. And I could feel it, and so could she. And I want you to as well. Develop a palate for that. You can feel that intensity. Listen for it. That's your tell, all right? We'll talk about this in a lot of different ways, but how do you know if it's an adult need or a child need? How do you know if it's baggage or just, good old longing to be close? We're going to answer it in several ways. Here's one of them. It's actually simpler than you think in some sense. Baggage needs, baggage longings are basically just good old human needs, like the 4 I's, that weren't really met, so they developed this volatility. The difference is the volatility. It's the same stuff. It's okay to need, and it's cool to want connection and intimacy, but baggage connection starts to look more like rejection. You don't want me. I feel pushed away by you. Feel the difference? Baggage, it's cool to need encouragement, but baggage encouragement is like, I need you to think I'm really great. You never compliment me. You treat me like I'm a loser. You feel the difference? Okay? They're the same longing for connection or for affirmation, but one has a full tummy and one has an empty tummy, all right? And you can feel the intensity. That's your tell. You know how in the movies they say, follow the money, follow the money, follow the intensity. That's your trick, okay? So is it legit for me to want Norma to prioritize me at the book? Sure, and it hurts when she doesn't. As a matter of fact, something happened just this week I got to tell you about. Norma loves football. She loves Ole Miss football. And at some point, a weekend or two ago, she was watching Ole Miss football. And I come into our room, and I want to tell her about this thing that happened to me the day before at work. It was pretty intense and kind of difficult. And so I plopped down on the bed next to her, and I closed my eyes, and I said, I want to talk to you about this thing that happened. And so I'm telling her, I'm saying, this happened, and then that happened, and then when this happened, it was just awful. I mean, and then that happened. And she goes, oh, no. And I said, yeah, baby, thank you, yeah. Like that. And she goes, oh, Ole Miss just got intercepted in the end zone. That was what the oh no was about. I'm like, wait, what? That was the oh no? It wasn't like, baby, I feel your pain. Oh no, you've hurting you such a hard day. No, it's like Ole Miss dropped the pass and intercepted in the end zone. All right, so actually we laughed about it at that point. And I told her that her punishment was that I was going to tell the story in Chicago tonight. So we're even Steven now, okay? We're clean. We're clean. All right. But in the moment, I hopefully have grown some in the 20 years since she wrote the book. I managed those little parts of me that were going like, she doesn't care at all about you. She's caring about Ole Miss football. And I asked her for what I needed. I said, hey, in the future, would you be willing, if I'm telling you something really important, to pay attention and engage that? Okay? So if we bring an adult need and stay grounded, we can get it met. Child needs just freak out. You never listen to me. It's just you and your football. Okay? That's the difference between the child need and the adult need. Now, what's the difference between me back then and me now? Therapy, growth, the kind of stuff that we can all do in our body of Christ relationships. By the way, we do this in all of our relationships, not just our marriage. I want you to have that category kind of as a throwaway. Yeah, okay. Remember those core questions we talked about? This is something I want you to know just about humans and about yourself, about one of the ways that we kind of function. Basic principle, kind of secret of the galactic empire, is that if we don't get good answers to our core questions when we're growing up, we will continue to ask them of everybody in the world, hoping to get a good answer for the rest of our lives. We will ask them at work, oh my gosh, does Grace Church think I'm doing a good enough job? We will ask them at church, does she like me? We will ask them at Chick-fil-A, oh my gosh, she didn't say my pleasure. Maybe she, We will ask them on a train. We will ask them in the rain. We will ask them in a box. We'll ask them with John Cox, okay? And sure as shooting, we will ask them in our marriage, and when we do, we are toast. You will go 2 ticks and no dog lickety split, and it will be all over but the shouting, all right? So, one of the things we do with the intimacy deal is if I don't get that met, I'm going to be seeking it. I'm going to be longing for it. I'm going to be saying, I don't feel like you care. We're not close enough. I'll end up pursuing it. Some of you, one of you in every marriage in this room is more that pursuer. All right, now let me tell you about who you married. The other direction we can go if we have some baggage in the intimacy department is we can become one of those people who sort of doesn't care about vulnerability and closeness at all. They're like, this is kind of a bunch of touchy-feely stuff, James Bond wouldn't never do any of this, okay? No, 007, that's baggage. All right? You'll learn that. Something in you said, this is something that feels bad or that I don't know how to do, so I'm going to run away from it, okay? So with all of these, I want you learning when you have issues, when you have conflict in your relationship, that volatility or that withdrawal, that a ton of it is coming from in here, not in your marriage. Your marriage is just flipping the switch. And I want you learning that together. I want you to be curious. I want you to start asking, I'm not sure if I'm reacting this way because of my own stuff, or maybe because you are a jerk. I don't know which, but maybe it's me, right? Can we figure out my baggage and your baggage together? You want to do that? If y'all do that, I'll be getting thank you notes from you by Christmas. Let's look at another one, and we'll pick up speed here because I think you're getting the vibe. Our second I, identity. How might baggage show up there? Mary said there's more to relationships than just touchy-feely, just closey-closey. There's also the issue of knowing who I am and knowing what I value and being able to be me in our relationship and having room for you to be you in our relationship. So this is the issue of separateness and power and freedom and all that. And we need early relationships that sort of teach us this core question of, even though I'm close to you, I still can exist. I still can disagree. I still can be me. I can say no. And if we have missing pieces with that, we can have some marital baggage that goes a couple of different directions. Number one, if we have baggage here, you can end up feeling controlled, or you can be controlling. All right, let's look at them. Maybe you live always feeling kind of controlled by like a jerky spouse. Well, then let's just say that for the sake of argument, growing up, every time you started to have an opinion, it sort of got slammed by parental authority, right? Sort of the, I said no and that's final kind of attitude, okay? And the experiential message in that, the core question answer to that was sort of like parents' way matters, yours doesn't. And that whole angry dad alphaing you all the time thing feels terrible and scary and controlling. So what happens? I learned to be this kind of little compliant guy because I don't like all that conflict, okay? And then I marry you. And what's going to happen? Well, there'll be times in which you don't like my opinions, or in which you disagree, or you look disapprovingly at me, or you get kind of miffed. And what am I going to do? Because remember, that whole conflict thing, that whole being me and existing thing is scary to me. I'm compliant. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give in to you. Okay, that's fine. Whatever you want. I'm going to kind of disappear, right? I'm going to shuck and jive to please you. And presto, I'm controlled. Control baggage. All right? I was talking to a woman once, and she said, she'd been looking at why she felt so lost in her marriage. And she said, I realized that at some point I decided I gave up myself to make him love me. The sweet thing was that when he joined the therapy, he was like, oh my gosh, I don't want you to do that. Whatever it is in me that needs you to be different for me to be happy, I need to grow in that. Whoa. That's why humility, inability is our fifth eye. That's where I want us to go. The dude I was working with once was talking about his wife. He said, I can't say anything without her getting mad at me. He like panics if she's upset. And sure, we want to look at her edgy style. We're going to do that first thing in the morning. But I want to ask him, why is he giving her opinion so much power? Where's his sense of self? Where's his identity? Where did he learn about that? What are his core questions? What's his grounding? That's baggage. His inability to stand up to her, okay? Why is he giving her that much power? All right, the other direction we can go if we have control baggage is we can be controlling. I saw a couple once, and the dude was like, he grew up, he was like mommy's little hero, but dad was real kind of demeaning. And so that combination turned him into a really grandiose guy. It's like he had to be always seen as like amazing, okay? And then his wife would have an idea, or she would disagree with him about something, and he would get all offended, like, why do you have to disrespect everything I say? I'm like, I don't think she's disrespecting you. I think she's just existing, dude, okay? Kind of like, if you don't think my way, you're an idiot because whatever. But what was going on in him is that he was looking to her to kind of do his bidding so that he felt kind of adored. That was his baggage, okay? Now, fortunately, he was in therapy. A lot of the kind of grandiose types, the types who want all the worship and like, you think I'm amazing, usually they don't come to therapy. But he was really open to it and was willing to take some ownership of like, you know what? I think one of the reasons I'm controlling is because when you disagree with me, it makes me feel stupid. I'm like, yes. And I said, would you like to ask your wife a question? Like an adult? And he goes, do you think I'm stupid? And she just melted. No, I just want to exist like you, all right? So, making sense? The things we learned or the things we didn't learn are going to show up in your marriage, guaranteed. And I want this to be the problem, not just that your spouse is annoying. Third eye, imperfection. I mean, who doesn't feel fear of failing? Who isn't critical of your spouse? And that's one of the reasons you get married, right? Have somebody to criticize 24/7. They're so convenient. They're right here. All right? So we got issues of shame and we got issues of forgiveness. And one of the things we said last time was in order to build this piece of software, in order to be alive and kind of thriving here, we all need some really kind of rich experiences in relationships. As you remember, we develop these things in relationships that teach me and show me that even though I'm fallen, or even though I'm imperfect, or even though I'm not amazing, or whatever, love doesn't go away. That it's safe to be real me, all right? If I have a loss, I can stay grounded and all of that. And if that goes well, then I develop this sense of like core question of I can be imperfect and you can be imperfect. And that's the deal, Hashtag human race. Otherwise, we're going to go two directions again. I'm going to blame you or I'm going to blame me. Remember blame marriages from the first conference? Now, you see this one all over your marriage, right? Blame is kind of our go-to. Let's look at blame me first. When I do my own guilt trip, I'm feeling condemned or I'm feeling criticized all the time. How might that be baggage? Here's an example that relates to me as well. The generation that parented my generation tended to parent more out of shame than out of like consequences. Those of you who've heard my parenting stuff or the book know I'm really big on parenting out of consequences, not shame. But not so much that crowd, okay? They were sort of like if you mess up, it wasn't like, oh, you get some consequence. You lose your Legos or your Lincoln Logs. It was more like, I'm surprised at you. We raised you better than this, okay? So you grew up with this thing of like my primary motivation in life is not to be bad or seen as bad, okay? So you grow up with this loaded fear of being bad, and then you get married, and maybe my wife just wants to talk to me about a way that I hurt her. No harm, no foul. She just wants for me to understand her. But here's the key. That being bad thing is loaded for me, so I don't hear that as a legitimate complaint or a place for me to grow. Little 5-year-old, little square shows up. You're saying I'm bad. How dare you? You don't see all that I do. Blah, blah, blah. And I blow up. Okay? Now why? Why am I so scared of my own fault? Because bad's really loaded to me. I mean, anybody else got that trigger? I think all of us do. That one. Think what it would do for your marriage just to recognize that. Well, I have a little kid trigger that makes me blow up if you ever say I do anything wrong. What's up with that? Will you help me make sense of it? This is where I want your marriages by Monday, all right? Let's do one more briefly, and then we'll take a break. And we'll come back and talk about how we should handle this stuff, all right? Impulse control. Remember that one? Impulse control is the ability to have a feeling and think about it and decide what to do with it rather than just acting on it, okay? Our little 5-year-olds, internal 5-year-olds are terrible at this one. In the office, I call these untamed feelings that we never wrapped any self-control around, so they sort of lurk in the background until we pop off Remember this joke, this story from the first conference? Guys, you're driving along and your wife says, honey, turn right up here. And we're like, I know how to drive, okay? And you start like ripping out of your shirt, and getting big and green. And she turns into Natasha Romanoff. And it's like, hey, sun's going down, big guy. Sun's getting real low, because you're losing it. Now, what happened in that scenario? Well, if you're like most people, what happened is you felt a feeling that was provoked by your wife's assistance, a feeling that you're too stupid to get to the church without my help. Poor little fella, let me help you. But instead of thinking, wow, that touched something in me, some shame or some whatever, we blow up like I'm not 5 years old. Actually, you are, okay? So, next question. This ability to manage our emotions is an ability that most of us do not have. It's one of the hallmarks of adulthood. Any of you who were in the airports in the last week saw this, The ability to not go off at the desk agent when they cancel your flight. The ability to contain emotion and not react. Think how much that's behind our marriage problems. All right, so that's our Fantastic Four. These are the categories in which we have baggage. And they're the basic building blocks of our lives and relationships. These are the way they go wrong. A category for how they're happening, lurking in the background of all of us. And this is how I think about marriage therapy. I don't do marriage therapy to the adult squares. I want to learn as quick as I can about the little squares and become an advocate for them to figure out what they're needing and help you to figure out what they're needing. So part one here tonight is basically, I want to identify and create this category for you that this is going on, and I want you to learn to listen for it, listening for that intensity, that tell, and for it to become something you can talk about as sort of the other part of your marriage and be able to do that together. So we're going to come back after the break and talk about how we should handle these things so they don't contaminate our marriages so badly. All right, welcome back. We got most of our crowd. A couple of details. My podcast, a lot of y'all know about my podcast, Good Enough Living. It's basically just a platform for my talks. People used to say, how can I listen to your marriage conference? And given that I was born in 1960, I tell you what, let's get rid of Miles Davis. I bet no one has ever said that before. Let's get rid of Miles Davis. Yeah. Anyway, people say, I want to listen to your conference. Anyway, being born in 1960, I'd be like, okay, well, I'll make you a cassette, So anyway, my tech people have pushed me to go a little bit more high tech and do it on the podcast. So you can listen to parenting, marriage, there's stuff on there on growth. A couple of things for therapists. There's a lot of sermons on there. Anyway. Also, I have a couple of books. I already told y'all about the parenting book because I sold it here first. And my favorite thing I've ever done is my other book called The One Story. I'm going to preach out of it tangentially on Sunday. But it's I always love the story of how God's redemption unfolds from the beginning of the Bible all the way through. It starts at Eden, and you can trace it all the way through the Old Testament until Christ, until heaven. And that's always been kind of a spiritual hobby of mine. And God kind of told me one day, you need to write it down. And so it's the one story a psychologist reaches for the heart of God. And it's kind of how can we bring the story that God tells us about his heart for us, and how can we hear how much he longs for us and wants us? It's my favorite thing I've ever done. The rest of my career is downhill from there. I didn't bring any books to sell because the flying situation was already so difficult as it is, but you can get it on Amazon, okay? So, welcome back. Bottom line, we're talking about there are 4 people in every marriage. People during the break are already going, oh, I know what my spouse's little square does, When you can become as much of an expert on your own little square, we'll be getting somewhere, okay? You know, catchphrase for me is, what am I a greater expert on, my own screwed upness or my wife's? You know, if asked to give a presentation, which would be longer? You know, my complete seminar on my wife's screwed upness, complete with PowerPoints and group discussion, you know, or my little meme about my own, you know, anyway. So we're all 4 people in every marriage, and we're walking around with these things that we need to work to function, but also things that we really long for, things that really hurt when they're not there, things that get stepped on and not seen. And to that little kid part of us, it feels for all the world like marriage is going to be this place where maybe that good family that I've been waiting for, maybe that thing that I never had before is going to happen here. And actually, that's behind most of our marriage conflicts. Our inability to manage that disappointment of how our marriages actually don't satisfy that need, speak to that injury. In fact, marriage kind of does the opposite, if you think about it. I mean, think about like the way you act in your marriage. Marriage acts like this magnifying glass to our pathology, in a sense. Have you noticed that? I mean, you don't act this way with your bowling buddies, do you? It's like, I just made a strike and none of y'all said anything. It's like you don't even care. You know, we don't talk like that in the rest of our lives, just in our marriages. You know, I don't know what the deal is with that. So, why? Why can't marriage fix all this stuff? I mean, my point is that we all got this baggage, and if you bring it in your marriage, it makes some trouble. And there's a lot of ways in which that corrupts your marriage, and that your marriage can actually fix that. Why? I mean, why does this create so much difficulty to bring, like, your childhood stuff into your marriage? I mean, if you've got unmet emotional needs, it seems like you should be able to sort of just move it over to your next, you know, biggie relationship, like transferring credits from a college, you know. I mean, like, it should work, because marriage is like our most important relationship, right? So why doesn't it fix these places? Well, I'm going to start telling you, and it's also going to give us some hints into what our marriage actually can do that we usually don't use it for. It's actually we try to use it to do a power it doesn't have, and it's got a power that we haven't used yet. That's kind of what part 2 here is about, all right? Here's the bottom line, though, of why it doesn't work. Basically, childhood needs and adult needs are apples and oranges, all right? They develop and they function in different categories of relationships. Let me explain this, because it's another one of the secrets of the cosmos. Remember our developmental story we talked about with the 4 I's of learning intimacy and learning identity and learning to manage imperfection and impulse control? I don't want to go too fast for you, but those childhood needs were designed to be met during childhood, okay? I don't want to go too fast for you. This is so key. God created love and freedom and power and forgiveness and imperfection, that software compilation, to be met in what I call developmental relationships. And I want you to have this category, because it's going to be key to making sense of how to decontaminate your marriage. Developmental relationships are a very specific kind of relationship. They're a very specific category of relationship. And here's what they are. Developmental relationships are relationships in which someone who has gives to someone who needs for the purpose of their growth. It's a very specific structure, all right? In other words, the unique design of a developmental relationship is, I have goodies, you don't. Let me give to you, you grow. Voila, all right? That's a developmental relationship. Here's some examples. Aside from me and you right now, we're in a developmental relationship. I'm giving to you. What else we have? You and God, obviously a developmental relationship. Parent and child. Parent gives to the child. Teacher and student. Pastor and their flock. Therapist and a client. A small group and its members. a small group can give to the members in a developmental way. You and your own lunchbox, the stronger and more grounded you get inside, you're able to reach more inside and say, okay, just because this person doesn't like me, am I unlikable? We get a grounding. Something inside of us gives us something. Good, safe, wise friends. Those are some of my most important developmental relationships now. And that is friends who, we'll talk about this later on in about 30, 40 minutes. People who you've learned are safe and wise and trustworthy. And me and my safe people kind of take turns. Like, I kind of need your help today. And you can do that with peers and safe friends, okay? Now, developmental relationships. Cool stuff, right? Now, boys and girls, notice what's not listed on this list of developmental relationships, right? Marriage. Marriage is not a developmental relationship. Marriage is not a parent-child relationship, though your relationship may look otherwise. It shouldn't be, okay? Marriage is not a developmental relationship. Marriage is an adult mutual sharing relationship. Marriage is an adult peer relationship. That's its structure, okay? It's apples and oranges to developmental relationships. It's Apple and PC, all right? They don't run on the same software. In other words, marriage is designed to be two grown-ups. I'm going to tell you how it's supposed to work, all right? It's supposed to be two grown-ups, both of whom have some lunch boxes. In other words, I can function some without you getting it or hearing me or whatever. I've got some goodies, all right? Deciding to share life together, adult to adult. And that's not the kind of relationship that actually helps childhood parts of us grow up, okay? So marriage is not a developmental relationship. It's not designed to resolve or repair our unmet emotional needs. All right, so the degree that any of us have the expectation, and we all do, that our marriage is ultimately going to meet those developmental needs, those 4 I's, resolve that issue, and we all do. We're kind of swimming against the grain. We're cutting against the current, okay? She'll want X, you'll need Y, you'll be 2 ticks and no dog. I need, you need, okay? Like the couple I was talking about earlier tonight, she's longing for intimacy. He's longing just for her to say he's good enough. And they're living in this sort of tug of war of who's going to get their need met, okay? Well, neither one of them can as long as it's that tug of war. That's the secret, okay? Now, why? Why is that? Is it because they don't love each other? No, it's because developmental relationships and adult-adult marriage relationships are chalk and cheese, okay? They're not designed to meet our needs. They're designed to be the fruit of our fullness, okay? So can your spouse affirm you? Yes, of course they can. Go for it. And if that's not happening, we can work on it at that adult level. But if you're feeling that volatility, remember that tell where things start to have that intensity? Your spouse's affirmation of you, for instance, is never going to ultimately answer that core question because adult-adult relationships like marriage aren't designed to finally answer those. Let me say it the sad way. There's no amount of affirmation that your spouse can give you that's going to ultimately make you feel good about yourself or feel that intimacy need fulfilled or that sense of being acceptable, all right? Let's observe a moment of silence. Don't panic, though, because there are other places we can get it, and there are ways we can get our marriage to do it if we do it right, okay? That's down the road. We'll get there. But bottom line, marriage is designed to be the fruit of our wholeness, not the resource for it. Marriage should be sort of like, I'm kind of complete. I got a lunchbox, but I'm also a hot mess. And you're kind of complete, and you got a lunchbox, but you're a hot mess too. We're going to picnic together with our lunchboxes? And better yet, and here we go, take cooking classes together to be better lunchbox filler-uppers together instead of fighting. And by the way, if you can't meet me there, if you don't want to go on a picnic with me there, I'll be sad. But I'm not going to be mad, and I'm not going to throw down because I have my own lunchbox. And I got some other resources. We can work this out. I'm kind of grounded. And again, this is where we start moving into the cool part. Being that grounded, being able to tolerate your spouse not getting it, or not meeting that need, or not touching that little square. Being grounded enough to deal with that in an adult way instead of freaking out is actually the best foundation for us to be able to work it out and ultimately meet that little square need, okay? Because now you're growing together, not dependent on each other, all right? More on that later. So, marriage is designed to meet adult needs. Now, I've got this put in your handout because I knew you would want it written down. Yeah, back of page 1. Is that a narcissistic thing to say or not? Like, oh, I knew you'd want to write this baby down. This is just some gold here, man. Anyway, whatever. Marriage is designed to meet adult needs like connection, companionship, not make me stop feeling lonely. Okay? Caring and compassion about my struggles, not fix my pain. Mutual understanding, not tell me I'm right, you're wrong. Safety and trust, not make life easy enough to where I never have to be powerful with you. All right? Win-win problem solving, not help me feel big by doing what I say. Do you feel the difference between the adult need and the child need? Mutual growth, not you're the problem. Forgiving one another, not tell me I'm not a bad person. You feel it? You feel how they had just a different vibe to them? One of the things I want you to have tonight is to leave with a context, a category for how different those feel. And if those adult needs, these kind of things, aren't part of your marriage, then work to develop them. That was kind of the last conference, all right? But when those needs and those feelings start to turn into volatility, where 2 plus 2 is equaling 7, I want you to start asking, where's the other 3 coming from, okay? That intensity is your tell, okay? Time to look at the 5-year-olds. So, get the problem? I want my wife to make me stop feeling insecure, and she can't do that. So let's quit beating her up about it. So let's talk about what we should do with this stuff. All right, how should we handle our baggage and our little square stuff erupting in our marriages? I mean, is there not like anything we can do? Like, am I saying that marriage is completely off limits for meeting these little kid needs we have? No, I'm going to tell you how. And I want to talk about what we can do with each other's stuff. Number 1, to keep it from so much contaminating our relationship, but also how to engage it in a way that might actually be able to help one another grow. Let's look at 5 things. Number 1, discover these parts of you. LYB, learn your baggage. That's the goal of this talk. If somebody says, what was Cox's point on Friday night? It was to give us a category to start listening to and discovering the little kid junk in us that distorts and contaminates our marriage, okay? You and your spouse love each other good, just fine. It's these 2 little kids who are causing all the problems. I want you to learn the ability to recognize them. And you might need other people's eyes to help do that. Some of y'all are going to ask at some point later on tonight or tomorrow, like, oh, how do you know if it's this new? We need other people's eyes to help us. I need to have safe people I can go to and go, this keeps happening in my marriage. Do you think that's me? And if you have good friends who tell you the truth, they'll go, yeah, you kind of do that everywhere, dude. And that's wounds of a friend are better than kisses of an enemy, okay? That's having those friends I call who stab you in the front, you know, as opposed to stab you in the back, get it? I want to be told the truth, all right? In other words, start looking for these things. Healthy couples get curious. I want you saying, could this be my stuff? Could the reason I'm getting this mad be kind of my little kid reactivity? Just you asking that question can transform your marriage, okay? I mean, have you ever said that in your marriage? Instead of like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? I want to say, this is really hooking something, activating something in me, and I'm not sure what it is. It may be my stuff. It may be that you're a jerk. I don't know. But at least we get curious about it. Let's ask the question, all right? I was working with this couple once, and they were they were building a house, and that's one of the top two causes of divorce is building a house together. And so they were fighting all the time about money. All right. And it was mostly getting activated out of her. She would erupt with a lot of like explosive kind of anger and fear, like, what are we even thinking here? This is ridiculous, real tense, And dude was like, whoa. But the cool thing was she was willing to get curious. And she was willing to kind of stop and do kind of what we're doing and go, wow, this keeps getting blown up. I can feel the intensity. Wonder what's up with that. And I'm like a detective. I'm like, let's start learning. Like, what'd you learn about money? What's your story? Well, it was an easy dunk shot. When she was a kid, her dad left her alone with her mother. And her mother had to support them, like work 2 jobs. They lived hand to mouth. She was terrified about money. And the dynamic of, whoa, just watching this bottomless pit of paying for this house just drain out was terrifying her. But instead of feeling afraid, she would get angry. Y'all know my little saying? I mentioned it in the last conference, that anger is usually the second thing that we feel. In other words, the first thing we feel is usually something kind of vulnerable, something kind of scared. But most of us don't like that. We'll layer it with anger. If you're trying to make sense of anger in your life, look at the thing you're feeling before. In other words, you're, miss every light trying to make it to a job interview. And you top the next hill and the light changes yellow and you bang your steering wheel. You're angry, right? No, what were you feeling right before that? Helpless? Scared you were going to miss the job interview, you see? A ton of our anger is the second thing we feel. So she was terrified, and then that led to the anger, okay? Now bring that to the marriage, and they have conflict. But she started to say, she was curious. She started to be open. She started going, you know what? I'm always afraid about money. And I think I'm doing this here. And she looks at her husband, and she looks at me, and this vulnerability that was so cool. And she says, I think I'm dumping all my anxiety about money on us and you and this house. Maybe this is about me. Then she did something really cool. She looked at her husband and she said, instead of me trying to control this, can we just take the fact that this is this scary to me into account? And he just softened. He's like, yes. Instead of coming at him with the intensity of that little kid part, I can't believe we're doing this. She listened to that intensity. She listened to that tell. Then formed her about a place where she needed something. Listen to what she did. She started solving a problem like a big square adult seeing the little square and asking for what she needed in the relationship, not reacting like a child. Okay? Because she got curious. Secret of the universe. So I want you to get curious about this. Use the 4 eyes and think about it. Start learning. Think about it. What did I learn in my family about intimacy? What did we do about emotional connection and sharing what you feel or trusting somebody or being open with the more vulnerable parts of me? What did I learn about being powerful or having a sense of who I am, of being strong, of being able to handle problems independently? What was the vibe in my family about that? What were our core questions? What were our core answers? I want you to have these categories because I want you to use them to help you be curious. What was imperfection like when I was a kid? How did people respond if we screwed up or weren't good enough? Oh, wow, that was really loaded. That's gold for taking back to your marriage to learn. What did we do with impulse control? Did I ever learn that I could have a feeling and not need to explode in it? Was that modeled for me? Did I see that? What did I learn there? Another story about me. I'm working on a marriage book right now. So give me your prayers. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. You think, I talk about it all the time. I ought to be able to write about it. I think it's like, I wrote a parenting book first because I'm a really good parent. And I wrote a God book next because I'm a pretty good son of God. And I hadn't even finished my marriage book because I think I'm a terrible husband. I think I'm dealing with things as I grow up, you know. At some point I'll grow up enough to actually write the marriage book well. But I was working on the marriage book, and I showed Norma a chapter. I said, here's the latest draft of this chapter. And she reads it, and I checked back in later on, and I said, what'd you think? She said, unenthusiastically, she said, yeah, I think you're getting close. That's not what Little Square wanted to hear. Okay? I kind of slump, and inside I'm going like, oh, thanks a lot. Thanks for your encouragement about how good a job I'm doing. Like, I think you're getting close. All right, really? And so I'm going like, whoa, I feel myself reacting like something's going on here. And I told you, my job is kind of like detective work. Like, what's going on? So I start thinking like I have to put myself in timeout. Yeah, okay, I'm still on track. I put myself in timeout, like whatever you do, John, you can't say anything at this point. And so I started like thinking, what is my deal? Well, one of my unanswered places, one of my little kid squares is the issue of imperfection, like resolving that one, or in my case, perfection. But the issue of like, am I good enough? Do you think I'm good enough? Am I doing good enough? Blah, 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 blah. So I have to always excel, all right? Which, as pathologies go, this one got me a doctorate, It's better than having a meth addiction or something. But anyway, so I realized that the reason this was like amping me up was because she wasn't praising me at all, okay? I needed her to really get excited about this. Think of all the lives you'll change, John. Let's go and put this on the refrigerator together. Something like that. So I want you to begin looking for these parts and discovering them. Why did that light me up? Secondly, I want this to be something that you talk about. A huge way to conquer this and keep it from corrupting your marriage is to let it be a very verbal part of your relationship. This is a great topic for date night. I want you saying, you know how controlling my mom is, right? Tell me I'm wrong, but I swear that's why when I walk in the door and you ask me to help, why I go ballistic. I don't know. And your wife will go, yeah, I can't imagine, Or I'm just spitballing here, but I swear that my ears trigger to my dad when I feel like you don't hear me. I want this to be something that you talk about. I want you to include it in your interaction. I want you to have the humility together to be able to ask about it. To say, hey, I kind of feel like you're loading a lot of stuff into this. Can we get curious about that? And I want you to say, maybe so. Let me try that on. Maybe I am. Let's figure out what it is and get it out of our marriage. Remember, the enemy is not your spouse. The enemy is the stuff that we do to each other. Norma and I will have an interaction and we'll feel, how you can feel it. You can feel it shift and it starts kind of escalating. We will literally say, okay, something just shifted. Do we need time out? Okay. I had a guy in a couple I'm working with right now who last week, his wife said something and he says, okay, wait a minute. I just felt something. I'm like, yes, for the first time. All right. But what he was saying was something about what she just did touched something. I'm feeling it activating. Okay. That awareness is gold. Okay. So maybe time out if you need to. It's easier to talk about this when you get into your frontal lobes. All right, another idea for talking is ask questions. I want you to challenge the little square baggage assumptions, all right? So I'm talking to Norma a couple of years ago, and she says, oh, guess what? Callie and I are going to go to Paris this summer. And I said, just you and Callie? And she said, yeah, isn't that great? All right, well, y'all know me well by now. This is my third time here. You can imagine where that went in me. Like Mr. Security here. I start going to like, wait, y'all don't want me to go? Just you two? You're not taking me? Y'all not want to include me? Okay, fine. Just leave me out. I'm kind of going there. As I said, chicks dig that, right? Okay. So I timed out myself because I know this little square in me, and he gets insecure and he feels not wanted and all that kind of stuff. And I want to know, it's like if there's a snake in the room, you at least want to know where it is. There he is. So I made myself time out, and I backed up and I thought, okay, John, what do you need to ask? You need to challenge this little kid question, little kid feeling. You need to ask a question. What is the question you need to ask? And so I came back to her and I said, can I ask you a question? She said, yeah. I said, so just you and Callie are going to Paris. Did you not want me to go? Like, is there an issue there? And she just kind of softens and she goes, oh my gosh, no, not at all. That's not at all. Callie just said that all of her girlfriends in Nashville, Callie wasn't married at the time, all of her girlfriends are going on these mother-daughter trips. And Callie said, I want a mother-daughter trip. She said, like those trips that you and your dad take. Me and my dad would always go on these trips. We'd go fly in airplanes or we'd go sailing or whatever. She says, it's like those trips that you and your dad take. You don't take your mom, it's just y'all. So Callie just wanted to do a mother-daughter trip. It wasn't like we were trying to exclude you, all right? And like little part of me goes, okay. You don't want to reject me after all right? She softened. She responded in this wonderful way. Why? Because I acted like a grown-up. And people like grown-ups. And they answer questions for grown-ups, okay? And I heard my little kid acting up, and I took the wheel out of his hands. This is baggage. And I said, what do I need, okay? So more good news as we start to build what we can do in our marriages with this stuff is if you can address the little kid needs, the little kid baggage, you can get the adult needs, the adult love met in spades, okay? This is where we're ultimately going. That marriage can help us engage our baggage as we more and more recognize its baggage and engage it together as adults, okay? But think what it would do for your marriage if you could both get to the place where you understand and care about each other's little kid stuff, okay? Because it is part of your marriage. It's part of y'all. It's 4 people in the marriage, remember? By the way, why do we resist talking like this? Why do we resist engaging in our marriages like this? I mean, part of it is that a lot of times we don't think in these categories. Like, wow, I've got this sort of immature part of me living inside. In our culture, we have a lot more awareness of that. But if you're like me, one of the reasons I like to resist it is because it's kind of vulnerable. I mean, it's not my favorite thing to stand up here and tell y'all what a wimp I am, all right? But I figured, somebody's got to say it first, It'll be me. But it's vulnerable to say, I think I'm struggling or I'm afraid. Can you help me make sense of that? Now, I don't know about you, but me not going to talk like that. Me Conan, me not need, me not fear. Me just hold it inside and yell at you, okay? But if you can be powerful enough to sort of engage it or admit it or talk about it and bring it to your spouse in that context, it'll change your marriage and it'll change your life, okay? So marriage is not off limits to the little kid stuff if we engage it like adults. Got it? All right. Number 3, own it. This overlaps with talking about it. But what does that mean? It means that when I encounter some of my stuff, I accept this is maybe about me. I say, you know what? I think I'm disproportionately reacting here. Could that be about me? I'm not sure. Would you help me think? What's up with this unappreciated feeling that I have? I think it might be baggage. That's owning, as opposed to, what is your problem? That curiosity, okay? I had a wife I was working with once, and she would say to her husband, oh my gosh, what you said hurt my feelings so bad. And he was gone, as soon as he heard that. But do you hear the blame, the not ownership in what she's saying? What I encouraged her to do was to approach it a little bit more softly with him, a little bit more ownership. And for her to say, what you said hurt my feelings a lot, but I'm really not sure if that's because I'm being too sensitive or whether you're being unkind. I'm not really sure. Can we talk about that? I don't know whether it's my ears or your mouth. Okay? Feel the difference. Feel the ownership. Feel the curiosity. When you can talk that way, your chances of your spouse actually hearing you, if you have that curiosity and that ownership, are going to go up 1,000%, all right? So you can bring it to your spouse. You can bring this little part stuff to your spouse if you take responsibility for the 5-year-old first and own it, and then they can join us in that process of growing, okay? Not, oh my gosh, you make me feel like a loser. No, your dad did that, all right? Your spouse is just activating it. Instead, owning it says, I keep feeling horrible about myself, but maybe that's my stuff, all right? You do that and your spouse can join your project of growth, all right? Fourthly, you can bring the stuff to your spouse if you bring it to them second, all right? Little rule of thumb. In other words, if you're feeling neglected, or you're feeling misunderstood, or you're feeling not loved, or you're feeling not appreciated, stuff that's more child than adult, that's cool. I mean, welcome to the club. But in order to feel loved or understood or comforted or appreciated, whatever, we need to go to our other godly resources first to address and make sense of some of the intensity of that issue and kind of deflate it a little bit before we bring it to our spouse, okay? In other words, the first person you bring your baggage to make sense of it shouldn't be your spouse. Bring it to your other growth places first, all right? Take down the intensity, and then you can go to your loved one, all right? Here's a superficial, kind of silly example. I had a really yucky day at work several years ago, and really kind of felt like I'd done a crummy job. I mean, you kind of wonder sometimes, am I helping people? Am I any good at this? Blah, blah, blah. And I was feeling sort of this like, am I any good at this kind of feeling? And I'm packing my stuff headed home, and I catch myself realizing how much I can't wait to get home and tell Norma about this. I don't really feel like I did a very good job today feeling. And she was going to encourage me and tell me how great I am and how I'm sure that you did wonderful. And I realized I'm literally anticipating this. I'm like going, ooh, I want to go home and get a lot of goodies, okay? And then I caught myself. It's like, what is it the gladiators would say? We who are about to die salute you. I'm like, you're an idiot, Cox. You've walked this walk before. You know what's going to happen. You're going to go home. She's going to have had a bad day as you had. And y'all are going to go 2 ticks and no dog and play the whose life is worse war. Like, well, my day was worse than yours game. And I'm like, stop. So I stopped by my partner's office. One of the perks of being a psychologist is that you have live-in mental health professionals like next door, and they're free, okay? So I stopped by Jim's office, and I'm like, dude, can I have a minute? He was packing his stuff up too, but we sat back down, and I said, I got to tell you, I just feel like, I don't know if it's my shame or what, I just feel like a loser today. Like everything I've tried has just gone flat, and I feel like it's like I'm trying to help people, and it's not going anywhere, and I'm just feeling like, well, I'm just exhausted and like, ugh. And he starts like loving on me, and he knows about my issue about needing to be amazing and do a good job. And he's like, John, you do this thing where you put this pressure on yourself, and you've always done that. I mean, think about that little kid part of you. And I'm like, you're right. And I start to feel kind of this compassion for this little kid part of me that feels all this stuff. And he's like being loving and connecting and talking to me about this. And then the phone rings. My phone rings. And it's Norma. And he goes, let me answer it. So I hand him my phone, and he goes, yeah, it's Jim. Yeah. Doing therapy on your husband? And I hear Norma through the phone go, good. So but anyway, I was able to kind of dump this stuff and get a real connection from him. And he helped me kind of like connect with that part of me and resolve some of that stuff. And then In other words, I went to my body of Christ people first, my second family first, and he was able to really fill up some of those empty places. And when I got home, guess what? Norma had as bad a day as I had had, and we didn't play the Whose Day Was Worse war. She said, ugh, I don't have much to give. And I'm like, I don't have much to give either. And we said, you want to just be vegetables together? Instead of two ticks and no dog needing stuff from each other all the time. And we went from demanding to sharing. And from being like children to being like adults. Again, once we confront the little kid needs stuff, we get the adult needs met in spades, okay? Lastly, I want us to grow here. How do we build our lunchbox? How do we get new answers to our core questions? There's a whole conference on the podcast on how we grow, or of course you could always have me back. I'll do it for you in person. But I'll at least throw some ideas about the dynamic of growth against the wall and see what sticks. And we can talk more about it in Q&A if you want. But God knows that none of us are completed from our growth. He knows that we have missing pieces and missing software and bad answers to our core questions. And I mean, he knows marriage is not a developmental relationship. And he knows we have to have developmental relationships in order to grow. Right? So what's he going to have to do if he's going to meet us here and help us here? He's going to have to give us new developmental relationships. If marriage is not a developmental relationship, he's going to have to give us another kind, and he does. The body of Christ, our second family, you're sitting with them. Okay? The reason that Paul and Peter, that the epistle writers talk so much about those each others in the New Testament is not because they're telling us that we need to go be nice to each other. They're telling us all those each others are bear burdens and confront one another and comfort one another, because the way that we treat each other within the body of Christ is our new developmental relationship where we can actually heal the places that are missing. That's what Jim did with me that night after work. He, a body of Christ person, one of God's people, Christ with skin on, an incarnation in fellowship, gave to me in a place I needed to be given to. So instead of trying to suck it out of my wife, which would turn into two ticks and no dog, I was able to go to my body of Christ. God's safe, loving people. Marriage is not a developmental relationship, but the church is. And everywhere I go, whatever I'm speaking on, I always want to bring this up because I want to encourage church bodies like y'all's to be thinking about what would it be like to be becoming a place where we can really bring who we are. I try to model that in my conferences. I want you to see the places where I'm weak or where I screw up. I want you to get a vibe for the fact that it's safe to not be all together. I want a church to become that kind of place for each of you. Our growing up doesn't end in childhood. We can still grow. I mean, I do it for a living. And we grow by bringing those incomplete places into new relationships before we bring it in our marriage. What that means is good, safe, wise friends like me and Jim. All it takes is one. If you just have one, start looking for these people. I collect them. When I find somebody that's like, whoa, this is good, I want to hold on to that relationship and develop it. That is a life-giving thing for me and for that person. Look for people. I collect them I call them seashells, because you find them kind of accidentally. You're sort of surprised when you find them. And you kind of go, whoa, you kind of get it. You're like, wow. And sometimes you pick up the seashell and there's like something living in it, you throw it back. But at least you're going to go, whoa, okay? People who will keep your confidence. People who don't lead with judgment. People who have grace towards you. But also people who tell you the truth. Stab you in the front. If all your friends say is, oh my gosh, I can't believe he did that, get new friends. You need friends who will say, yeah, you kind of had that coming, Confidentiality. Why is gossip listed among the top sins in the world in Romans 1? You know, go read Romans 1. It's like, and they are slanderers and murderers and haters of God and deceivers, and they're gossips, and they are thieves. And there's like somehow, like, you know, I'm like, how did my supper club get in the middle of the pantheon of iniquity? You know, it's like, whoa. Well, think about it. Y'all remember this from other conference. One of the secrets of the universe of growth is that parts of us that are isolated, parts of us that are in secret, parts of us that are not known, never grow. I mean, one of the reasons that therapy works is not because of the amazing wisdom of Dr. John L. Cox, okay? Maybe a little. But it's because, for some reason I don't understand, God made it to where when wounded parts of us, little kids, little square parts of us, get brought into a relationship, something happens and they get better. They grow. And parts of us that are in secret, that nobody knows, get worse. It's one of the reasons we're doing this night in this conference, because I want to have your marriage be a place where you can actually unearth some of these things and let it be something y'all talk about. Now, some of what the Bible means when it says coming out of the darkness and into the light, it means that those things that are hidden don't get better. So, it's also, by the way, why fellowship is one of the means of grace. You guys are Presbyterians, right? You know the means of grace. You teach them what the means of grace are, right? Like, what are they? Scripture, prayer, worship, sacraments, and fellowship. Yeah, nobody ever remembers it. No, this is like the redheaded stepchild of the means of grace. It's like, oh yeah, fellowship. And what our culture has done is turned fellowship is like free time between Sunday school and church, you know. You have donuts, you know, this little fellowship time. But actually, I mean, all therapy is a systematized, strategic form of biblical fellowship. It's relating in a way that brings the parts of us that are screwed up and broken back into relationship. Now, I don't want that to be the exclusive property of therapy. I want that to be the property of the church. I want that to be something you form in your relationships in your like supper club groups or small groups. I started a small group ministry at a church in Atlanta, and basically what we did was teach how do you learn to hear another person and make room for them and create an opportunity for them to look at the parts of them that are incomplete, to bring them back to a new developmental relationship. By the way, one of the guys in my group had this friend who was from Africa. And, you know, their culture was so different from ours. And he was telling them about our classes on Saturday mornings in Atlanta, where I was teaching the small group leaders how to do small groups and connect with people. And so Joshua, my friend, was telling his African friend about this. And his African friend says, "So you have a class on how to love?" I'm like, yes. He actually said, "Do you have a class on how to eat?" It's like, we kind of need one, you know. For his culture, it was so strange that we actually needed to be taught to be able to be that open and connected with one another. Anyway, what fellowship really is, that fifth means of grace, is what we've turned therapy into. And that is a place where it's safe enough for me to really bring my heart. Now, this rabbit trail came from me asking, why is gossip so bad? Well, let me ask you, what's going to happen if I don't believe that you're going to keep my confidence, that I can really trust you to keep the secret of my heart? What am I going to do? I'm never going to tell you anything. And where is it that I'll never, ever, 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 ever grow? In isolation, where I don't tell anybody anything. So the reason that gossip and lack of confidentiality is listed among these worst sins is because it's the growth destroyer that keeps us from ever growing. So I want you looking and thinking in your church and in your growth outside of your marriage, how can we be finding and becoming people who can be that safe and that truth-telling and that confidence-keeping? This can be prayer groups. This can be mentors, people who know you and are about your growth. Of course, therapy. I mean, sometimes I tell people in their marriages who are struggling, it's like, come on, you're banging your head against the wall trying to make your spouse do that. Let's heal this part of you, okay? And of course, our relationship with God. God manifests himself to us directly and indirectly. Sometimes it's directly in our relationship with him. He tends to prefer mediators. He tends to come to us through one another, which is why I'm talking so much about relationship. But you know that passage in 2 Peter? Each of you has received a gift. Use it to serve one another as manifold stewards of the manifold grace of God. Each has received a gift. Use it in ministering to each other as stewards of the manifold grace of God. That's the passage. What's he saying? That, you know what the word steward there means? It's the word diakonos in Greek. And it literally is where we get the word deacon. And it literally means waiter. You've received a gift. Use it as a steward, a waiter of the manifold grace of God. But God also, I think, is so much of a resource for our healing and our growth directly. How many times I have had to come to him over and over when Norma doesn't get it or isn't hearing me, and remember, you know what? You always hear me. You never miss me. I can always trust you in that. Instead of doing 2 ticks and no dog with Norma. So, you want better marriages? Look for the kind of relationships in the body of Christ that start to answer those core questions. God designed it to do that. A major reason that marriage struggles nowadays in our culture is because in our culture we are pushing marriage to do something it was never intended to do, and that is to sort of be the source of all of our needs. God created us to live in community, and what our culture has so often done to marriage, even our Christian culture, is turn that community into a community of two. Like you and your wife, you and your spouse, cute little couple time. Y'all need a little getaway weekend. Like that's going to solve your problems. And that's a stagnant pond, guys. That was never supposed to work. God calls us to go to our growth places, be involved with other people, go to people like I went to Jim, go to one another and learn and grow and develop fullness, fill that lunchbox up, and then we come back to our relationship fuller. Remember, marriage is the fruit of our fullness, not the resource for it. So I want to encourage y'all, not only in your marriages tonight, but also as a church community, to be thinking about how do we become more and more safe to where we can be a body of Christ that can tell the truth like that and ultimately give to one another and that give back into our marriages and stop that tug of war. So, bottom line, marriage is for adults. And if you're going to do it, it'd be nice to have at least one adult present. In other words, it's like fireworks. Do not attempt without adult supervision, okay? I'm going to be teaching you a lot about marriage and about relationships this weekend. I wanted to hit it hard tonight in the biggest picture tonight, talking to all 4 of you, all right? The enemy is not your spouse. The enemy is that vulnerability and that insecurity and those wounds that we carry that we don't know what to do with, and we're all victims of that. And I want to start tonight kind of calling a truce on that and figuring out what it means to grow together. One thing I did not tell y'all during coming back from the break is that this is my Google Voice number. When I do parenting conferences, I mean, you know, people follow you to the car with questions at a parenting conference. It's like, okay, yeah, that's right, yeah. But marriage conferences, you know, you'll have some questions, whatever, and you can be asking for a friend, you know. But I want to give you an avenue in which you could ask a confidential question if you want to. So you can text me on that number and I'll be checking my phone. I will try to defer to the people who are present because when I do a conference, I want to create some of that church culture that I was telling you about. I want to create a place where we're all trying to figure this stuff out together. That's the body of Christ. And you may ask questions of me that I don't know the answer to because I'm just one of y'all. I'm a body of Christ person. I'm going to defer to the local group, but if you have a confidential question, you can text me. Now, I want to do questions all you want, and anything on marriage, okay? In other words, it doesn't have to be on just tonight. It can be on the last conference. It can be about conflict resolution or win-wins or intimacy or, heck, submission and leadership. We can talk about whatever you want regarding marriage, and text me if you want it to be a private one. So, let's talk about it. Yes, ma'am.
I have a loud, booming voice. I heard somebody say once that the reason we have difficulty during, like, the holidays when we see our families is because we revert back to what we were like as kids.
That's cool. Yeah, I like that.
And so when you're talking about the little person in us,
Yeah.
I see that parallel. What is it, have you noticed that, and what is it that like strikes at, is it the same list of things that bug us when we're talking to people in our family that talk really frankly like our spouses do? There's gotta be some parallel there, right?
So you're saying, okay, so what could it be about the holidays that resurrects these things more overtly?
Yeah, or it does seem to resurrect them the way that marriage does.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're
I've never thought about this. This is very
involuntarily with all those
interesting.
people, and so you have to deal with it.
Yeah, right. All right, so I'm first intrigued by the way you presented it first, and that is, like, could it be that when it comes to holidays, all of us regress at some level?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to go out and check my stocking first thing. It's like, I'm still kind of mad there's no bubble gum in it, you know? It's like, yeah, I want to be taken care of, and like, I swear,
Really.
that's got to be
I
something.
wonder if it's this list is similar,
Yeah.
and it brings up.
You mean like my list of adult needs versus child needs? Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, I didn't know.
Well, I guarantee we regress some during the holidays. Also, Hallmark movies would go out of business if we didn't idealize the holidays, you know? It's like, holidays are supposed to be amazing and blah, 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 so our expectations are higher and so we feel more loss. But the next layer you added was really interesting too, and that is, okay, well, this is a marriage conference, but what if we did this whole talk tonight regarding what your little square does with your dad now?
Yeah.
What your little square does with your mom now, you know? I mean, those parts are still real activated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, here comes the holidays and everybody's family together. And I saw a reel the other day, and it was a woman making a coffee recipe for the holidays. And she had like a half a carafe of coffee. And she says, and to that, for our holiday brew, and she starts just like booze pouring into it. Anyway, so something, something about the holidays, we have to engage all these people. Like, I do think that, was there something that y'all were sharing that was helpful? Like, oh, okay, yeah, right, good.
Just found out like a few hours ago.
So it's not accidental. It's like, by the way, right.
Anything you could tell us about conflict.
Right, right. Okay, well, I mean, think about what we've done tonight in a sense. Y'all were either at the last conference or you remember it. We'll talk about this a little tomorrow morning. Yeah. But essentially, this whole talk was a gigantic process of going bird's eye. Do you remember going bird's eye? In other words, one of the things to do if you're engaged in a conflict with your spouse is to sort of back off and sort of go fly on the wall and be able to sort of objectify it and look at it. Instead of just dancing the same old dance over and over and over again, something else can back up and go, you know, when this happens, that makes me do that, and you sort of have that objectivity. One of the coolest things, I think, for engaging the holidays or engaging family dynamics, like with my parents, whatever like that, is growing in that ability to have objectivity. In other words, I want to go, okay, one thing I know is that, my mother-in-law will be coming in, and one of the things I know she's going to do is she's going to say, well, when I was raising my Johnny, he was like, blah, 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 and you'll feel criticized for your housekeeping or whatever like that. No, that's going to happen. And I want you backing up and taking care of your own little square. Okay, I want you thinking the same way about these little parts in the 4 food groups, the 4 I's, with your family or your in-laws as you do with your spouse. That's why I said that this applied to all of us in every area of our life. To the degree that we don't have our core questions answered, we'll ask them of everybody. Okay, so the more we can become aware that I'm walking around asking core questions of everybody, the more on top of that I'll be. In other words, one of the reasons that I don't feel nervous, like public speaking, is because I had to answer the core question of, John, are you any good at this? Or are you waiting every time, watching your audience? Do they like this? Do they like me? I'm getting y'all to answer my core questions. If I do that, I'm toast, all right? I figure that some of you like it, some of you don't. I think tonight's pretty good. I wouldn't give it an A+, but I'm not asking because I don't want to be asking those core questions of y'all. I want to think that way about my family. How much am I going to be asking, oh, are you going to approve of the way I've set the table or the presents we've gotten or you bought too many presents for the kids? I want to be aware of that part. If you have that objectivity, you can go to your spouse with that. You can go to your safe people with that. Okay, I know that, so-and-so's coming this holidays and that pushes my buttons. And I want people with me in that, okay? So that little square is not just raw getting run over by, mom or whatever like that. But I do think the holidays activate it. That's an interesting question. Yes, ma'am?
I had a question about the go to other resources first part, and I guess there's 2 parts to it.
2 parts to your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Related to that. So, I agree that we have put too much weight on marriage and tried to find the solution to all of our problems in marriage. But then I guess that idea of go to other people first is confusing to me, and maybe that's my cultural understanding of marriage, as the closest relationship. And so then if I'm going to other people first, it feels like I could be in a way weakening the marriage, confiding in someone else above.
Well, you could be in some way doing what?
Weakening the
Weakening,
marriage.
okay.
Because I'm confiding in other people, trusting in them more than in my spouse that I have become one with. And then, so that's the first part. And then second part is the other people, you mentioned friends. So then that, I guess my question is, friends I see as peers also. And I could see other resources like a therapist or a mentor as a developmental relationship, but peers and friendship relationships, can we also then create the same baggage issues that we're trying to decontaminate our marriages from in our friendships by going to them first?
Yeah, those are great questions. You mean?
So,
I didn't want to cut you off.
yeah, no, so
Okay.
that's my question.
All right, so your first question, I wouldn't write it off as cultural. I think that's a good question. In other words, if Cox is saying go to your other resources first, what are we not saying? Well, number one, I'm not saying triangulate your spouse. In other words, I have a problem with you, but instead of talking to you about it, I'm going to go over here to Billy Bob and say, you're not going to believe what she did. I'm going to my other resources first, right? In other words, going to your other resources first doesn't mean throwing you under the bus behind your back. It means that I have other people who are going to help me grow. Now, maybe one of the ways we can contextualize that is I'm telling you guys as couples to invest in resources outside your marriage in order to grow. And I want you to talk about that. In other words, what we're saying is, in the context of you and me, which is the most important relationship, in order to preserve our marriage, I want us to have other people who we both trust. And I'm going to talk to Jim, and you can talk to Susie, and that will be a help for us. And we can talk about this in our groups. And maybe even since we've gone bird's eye on this, and we're discovering the baggage, and we're curious about the baggage, we can even say to one another, I think this is something that would help me to talk to some other people about. And we kind of give each other permission to do that. We're both invested in that process. So in essence, what we're saying, and maybe this could address your concern, me and my spouse are sort of the center, all right? And we're the center in terms of our level of commitment and investment and belonging and oneness, but we're not the center in terms of the only resource. As the center, you and me decide we're going to have other resources as an adjunct, as a resource to the core of the marriage. Does that speak to your question any?
I think that's helpful to like couch it, like frame it.
Yeah, I actually think I should add that to the talk. That's a good point. But yes, absolutely. So it's like we're sort of agreeing together that we're going to have other resources. All right, now your other question is very interesting too. And that is, okay, Cox, if you're saying marriages or a adult-adult peer relationship, how's that different from friends? Well, number one, because for some reason, like I said, marriage has that weird ability. I'm not sure exactly why it does this. I'll take a shot at it in a second if you want me to. Marriage has that weird ability to magnify our pathology. We expect more from our marriages than we do from our friends, I think. People get married and it's like, oh, well, you're supposed to be the fount of every blessing now, okay? And we don't do that with friends. So a lot of the reason for this talk is, whether you realize it or not, if you grew up in our culture, something in you is assuming marriage is supposed to address this need. Why don't you understand me and hear me? And we load our marriages with that, all right? We don't tend to do it that much with friendships. And the second part of that is, once you have this awareness that we're talking about tonight, if you can get this category of, hey, we both have these little squares, we both have this baggage, what are we going to do about it? If you can have that objectivity, which is kind of my goal tonight, then you can decide to be peers who work on one another's little kid stuff just like friends do. And what I like to do with friends who I feel like I can connect with is I want to start saying kind of like, can I bring something here because I need a little help with it? And what they'll say back is, yeah, can I bring some stuff to you because I need a little help with it? And we kind of have this agreement that we're going to be a resource to each other, but sort of trade and take turns. That's what me and my partner at work do. Now, if you can do that in your marriage, marriage is not off limit for your little parts. But you have to do it with that heads up, frontal lobe awareness that I wanted to build for you tonight. That make sense? Does that make sense to anybody else? Okay. Yeah.
John, it feels like if you agree as a couple, like we're gonna have these resources, then it's not betrayal to go to those resources.
Ew, that's a good word.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
So
like
it's
that.
Like, yeah, you talk to your friend, I'll talk to my friend, and it doesn't feel like I'm bringing people into this broken system in a way you don't like. We're both agreeing that we need to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was an issue recently that has historically kind of hooked me. And like I'd develop anxiety about it, and I'd get kind of controlling about it. And one of my friends actually helped me figure it out. And I'm like, whoa, I feel like this freedom from that. And I bring that to Norma and announce it. Well, nobody is happier on the planet that I've resolved that than her, okay? So these other resources are your spouse's best friend, okay? Because they're going to be taking some of this stuff and helping you metabolize it. And that's not a betrayal. And that's why I wanted to use the word, it's not a triangulation. We don't go to other people as an end round around our spouse. We go to other people as a resource to help us be able to engage our spouse better.
Well, one of the things that you said that I really liked was oftentimes we put marriage on this pedestal to where or at least in culture a lot of times, where we start to believe that that's the only relationship that we should confide in.
Yeah.
And when we do that, and we can't connect with our spouse in the way we want, we start to isolate, right?
Yeah.
So,
Are y'all hearing him okay?
Y'all hear in the back?
yeah, I was trying to reframe this a little bit too. So, I think what happens when we look at the hierarchy of marriage and we say, this is the only relationship that matters, or this is the most important relationship that matters, and then we stop, or we have seasons where we don't connect with our spouse or don't feel heard, etc., and then we tend to isolate. What happens is, we lose an opportunity to process that and to become just a better version of ourselves. And so I think, the beautiful thing about the church, what you were saying too, is that you have a community there with you to process, to look at and evaluate all those things as well. And so I was going to bring up another point, but I forgot it. The flight was fast.
Did you have a question?
I did, but I can't remember.
All right, well, we'll come back to it. That's some good stuff. Anybody else? Okay.
So, if I am going to be a good friend to somebody, what advice would you give that, the friend, the role of the friend? Somebody comes, I'm having an issue, you're going to help them. What would be some good questions? You said, be curious. You talked a lot about what you do, which is be curious, try to discover, listen, but we are not equipped because we are not, I don't know, like how can we be that friend? How can we serve others? What advice would you give us if somebody comes with an issue so that we can serve them?
What a cool question. Wow. Will y'all help me answer that? That's tough. It's hard to put words on it. Let's think about it. What is it that you need if you tell somebody, I'm feeling so much anxiety about the conference I'm doing in Chicago, right? What do I need to hear from you? What do you think would be a good thing to give me? Huh? All right, what are some things to not do? Let's start there. Huh? Don't diminish. Oh, come on, John. You're the amazing John Cox. I go, well, yeah, you're right. That's all I needed to hear. Not minimize it, okay? What else would you not do? Yeah, so if they're saying, well, use my example of I'm scared of doing a conference in Chicago. What would be a thing you wouldn't want to do? Not minimize it, not...
Make it some bigger than it really is.
Like, oh, dude, man, like Chicago, that's a big deal. You're not afraid when you go to Birmingham, but Chicago, yeah. Okay. How about don't Bible verse me and judge me? All right, well, God's going to take care of you and blah, 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 blah. What are we saying here? The first things to not do are things that would separate us. Right? Remember, this isn't rocket surgery. The thing that heals us, even if you don't have a degree or anything, is just the dynamic of being connected. So I want to say to somebody, whoa, you were onto it, be curious. What is it you think about it that scares you? I don't know. That's what most people say. Now you know you're on the right track because they don't know. And you're asking them something so they can know. I don't know. I just am afraid I'll feel stupid. And you go, you mean like shame? Like you'll goof up? Yeah. And you go, dude, that is scary. Now I'm kind of joining them, all right? Because I know what it's like to be afraid or feel afraid people don't like me. What's the old Seinfeld joke? What's the number one phobia in the world? Public speaking. What's the number two phobia? Death. So, as Seinfeld says, given any funeral, most people would rather be the guy in the casket than the guy giving the eulogy, whatever. I can connect with that. Like, wow, that is scary. Now, one of the things I love to ask people if they're bringing something that's struggling, you don't have to work too hard. Ask them, oh my gosh, what can I give you? What do you need? Ask them to ask. Ask them to think. Now, you're doing two things at once there if you do that. On the one hand, if you say, what do you need? You're saying, I'm here to give to you. That's nice, right? But the other thing you're saying is it's kind of incumbent upon you to kind of go inside and start asking, I wonder what it is I do need. And again, what most people will say is, well, I don't know. Well, you're on the right track again. See, you're leading them into this awareness of like, okay, wow, I have this fear, and I'm talking to my friend about it, and they have room for it. They're not Bible versing me or judging me or minimizing me or whatever like that. They're actually getting curious with me. And more, this thing that I've been carrying by myself, oh, I'm scared about Chicago, is becoming something I'm sharing with you. And one of the things I will do with people who I feel real connected to is I will even say, okay, so I'm going to Chicago, and if I totally screw it up, can we like laugh about it later? You know, go out and have beers and like, in other words, what heals fear? What heals vulnerability? What heals hurt? Connection. So instead of having to do some sort of miracle cure of brilliant psychology, we sort of outpunt our coverage there. Just shoot short. If you're just with somebody, it will be healing to them. Y'all think about it, how with is God's favorite preposition. I mean, if you look through the Bible, what is he always saying? It's like, well, yeah, walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll make it all better. No, it's like, I'll be with you. Emmanuel, God with us. Lo, I'll be with you always to the end of the age. He loves with. I will be your God. You will be my people. I will dwell among you. There's something about with that's healing. Now, the problem is that most people, the reason I started with what should we not do is because most people, if you're just a real person with a real person, you're probably a better therapist than you think. But what hooks us is we feel like we got to do something, or we got to fix them, or we got to say the right thing. And we start to put this pressure on ourselves to make it better. You know, one of the things that a therapist has to get good at is giving up our need to fix people. Instead, just having the vulnerability to be with them and maybe screw up. And something about that is connecting. And that connection in itself is so healing. Now, that being said, brief segue, this will become real relevant tomorrow. Everything I just said is applicable to repentant people, all right? In other words, tomorrow we'll talk about unrepentant people who do hurtful, destructive stuff, and just being with them makes them get worse. But with repentant people who are struggling, yeah, like, oh, okay, so you really just need to humiliate your spouse. I get it. You know, we're not going there, right? You like that, huh? But with repentant people, err on the side of being with. What's that line Job says to his counselors? Oh, that your wisdom would be silence. All right, so I love your question, though. I love the vibe it's coming from. It's like, how can I better be with people in that place? If you ask questions like that, and with the heart you just asked that, you gold, girl. You gold. I'll check my phone. Okay. None yet?
So my number one takeaway from your first conference, I think, was the big square, little square, and then the timeout, but I think my number one takeaway was, learning to think about the other little square. I think my number one takeaway from tonight is, I got to look at my own square. And one of my questions is, I have a friend.
Yeah.
Who's the less
I got a lot of friends.
I got a lot of friends. But I got one friend who's less emotionally intelligent than his spouse. and he struggles to find, sorry. I struggle to find, I don't always know how to ask myself the questions. Maybe it's like get a better therapist or something, but but I feel like sometimes I don't know, because Allison is just more in touch with her feelings and all this, and I just don't even know what's happening sometimes. And I don't always know how to ask myself those questions. And my number one takeaway from tonight really is, like, okay, in the conflict moments or whatever, it's don't just look to her square, because I thought that was a huge insight for me in the first 7 years ago or whatever. But when I'm thinking about myself in those moments, and what is it that, I just don't know how to ask good questions of myself, how to be curious about my own square, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Hey, you're close to the kingdom to ask that question. I mean, what you just did is the heart emotional vulnerability of have mercy on me, the sinner. I mean, that dynamic of I don't know how to ask these questions. Would that all our pastors had your heart there. I tell you, I really have needed other eyes. And spouses' eyes are good. You know, they know us better than anybody. But I need other eyes too. I need to say, all right, what you do is, I mean, if we did the growth conference, I would start with this. Every psychopathology you can name, or the sins you can make up to name, the crazy stuff you do that you could name, withdrawal or hostility or depression or anxiety, or fruit. They are symptoms. And when somebody comes to see me for therapy, they will always come with a symptom. They will say, hey, doc, I have this OCD thing. Or, hey, doc, I have this addiction to something. Or, hey, doc, I have this conflicts in my relationships. Now, what they're telling me about is kind of a manifestation. It's a fruit. It's a symptom. And what we start doing there is getting curious and being a detective. In other words, okay, so what you tend to do is when so-and-so happens, things don't go the way you want, you default into this anger. Okay, that's where we start. Let's get curious about that. What does that anger want to say? What does that anger experience? And we start listening to that anger. Like, what is it about? And remember, anger's the second thing we feel. So before too long, we start going, well, you know, I get angry like that whenever, let's pick something fresh. When my flight gets canceled from Delta. And it's like, I can't believe it, okay? So I wonder why that makes you angry, John. I wonder what the vulnerable piece is behind the anger. Remember, anger's the second thing we feel? Well, for me, it's like that sense of out of control. Little square me does not like being out of control. Little square me doesn't like somebody picking up that microphone at that podium. You know, that horrible feeling? You're at the gate, D13, and they're like, ladies and gentlemen, you're like, what's going to happen? You know, that out of control feeling sends me like spiraling, okay? There's an anxiety there. So now I'm on the right track, and I'm tracking it down. Now, I think we need other people's eyes to do that. So if you have the curiosity, that's a perfect curiosity. And I think one of the reasons we call hearing someone else mirroring is because they help us start to look inside of us and go, you know what? That feeling of out of control, like what I felt at the airport, I have that feeling a lot. And we start to see themes. And one of the things I'll say to clients is, you know, as you've talked today, you've told me several different things. Number one, you came in because your anger keeps getting you in trouble. But then you started talking about this need to control, like that happens like at the airport. But it also is something that you said happens when your kids act up. And blah, blah, and we start to pull together these threads. And we start to go, this is a real theme of the dynamic of what does it feel like when you're not in control. And now you start to have this awareness and you start to build this theme. That's how I discover it. And usually it takes me a few sessions to do that with clients and much longer to do that with myself. But I usually need other eyes for that. I need people who are kind of going, yeah, dude, you kind of do this. I think this is a theme. So that'd be my best advice is for other people to swing in. But approach it like detective work because you'll find themes. Our hearts always work according to themes, patterns. Yes, ma'am.
Possibly a little unrelated, but do you have any goodies for those of us who are scraping along, pardon, an extended bottom of the U?
Bottom of the U.
Bottom
You
of the
remember.
U, man, we're down there still. 12 years in.
12 years at the bottom of the U.
12 years. And I think I know, others around us who are also gently scraping along the bottom. All this is amazing stuff, but when you're exhausted out of your mind and dealing with those who have plunged you to the bottom of the U. I do love them. But I don't know, do you have any little nuggets of goodness? to sort of see us through to the upswing.
Let me ask the question a little bit.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
Okay. I think my microphone's coming down. Am I good? I read a study years ago on that graphed marital satisfaction over the lifespan. And it said that you start off marriage, start off marriage pretty high. Like everything's great, man, this is awesome. And then when you have kids, you sort of, marital satisfaction does this, all right? And it kind of stays down here until like you're an empty nester, and then it's like all good again, okay? And there's like literal like literature on this. And so I've always called that living in the bottom of the U. And we talked about it, I think it's in the intimacy talk in marriage number 1. Like we're living in the bottom of the U. Because how do you have time to have intimacy together when you got all these kids and stuff? Does that make sense, everybody? In other words, like, how do we survive down here? I'm not real sure exactly how to answer your question, but I'm going to take a shot at it.
Is there no hope? Just kidding.
Yeah, they grow up. No, well, let's figure it out. I mean, one of the things I like about Q&A is that I don't know all the answers, so I use my body of Christ to help me figure it out, you guys. All right, so what are you saying? In essence, what you're saying is, in a season of life with kids, and we're back in this season in some ways just with grandchildren. Norm and I will keep our grandchildren, like, we got 6. We'll keep 2 of them for the weekend, and we're like out for the count. I don't know how we, did it. But what you're talking about, let's think about it in terms of economy, like money in, money out, okay? So what you're saying is, with little kids, all you do is give, right? Okay, so I would think in terms of, let's think, what is it that you need? Somebody said, I was talking to somebody today, and they were saying, if somebody offered me a trip to Paris, I'd turn it down. They had little bitty kids. I'd turn it down just to like sleep for 2 days, okay? So there's sort of vegetative basic needs. What else would you want to have in your heart if you had more space in the bottom of the U? That's what I'm trying to ask. Let's break it down. Let's make it elemental. What is it that's missing?
Silence. Actually, yes, but that was a joke. I think, actually, that maybe is a little bit of the truth. Silence to let my own thoughts breathe.
Yes, yeah. Okay. So could I ask you a question as if you were a client?
Go for it.
Not to put you on the spot. All right, so one of my questions would be, what goes on for you regarding the dynamics of feeling permission to create space for yourself, be it babysitters, be it time away, be it saying no? How do you do with saying no and setting boundaries and creating guardrails for yourself?
Help me, Dave. Help me think.
You don't have to answer it. I don't want to put you on the spot.
No,
But
I
I
don't mind.
was thinking, this is what I do as a therapist, is I just think, I got a hunch.
I mean, there are 5 of them, so somewhat outnumbered.
Right, yes.
And it does become sort of difficult and prohibitively expensive to make space.
Right, yes. All right, so you're saying you are limited in terms of the boundaries you can have.
Yeah.
How good are you at restoring when you do have some space? Are you able to silence your own heart and really calm down and really get peace?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. How about other relationships? Like when you do have time, let's look at what you do have, okay?
Love it.
When you do have those people, you're able to feel in places you're really connecting?
Yes, I think when I do get a chance, but it's very limited, and so
The opportunities are very
the
few.
opportunities are few.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I said about the bottom of the U and the marriage conference is one of the things to be careful about is feeling like that connection is an event, that connection is an experience. In other words, I think I said in the conference, I've had some of the deepest connection in my marriage across the gurney in an ER while my daughter's leg is getting set. And that sense of I'm with you and you're with me and we're both seeing. There's that vibe of how much I'm living in a connected way. Even the sense of like, we're looking at each other and going, the bottom of the U is killing me. How about you? That's a resource. I'm looking for how to get some water out of the desert here.
That's good. No, that's good.
Can you steer me any?
No, I do believe that quality is a function of quantity, time.
Interesting.
And so we do have, you know, as a couple, lots of experiences together and lots of crises that we've navigated together, which we're really good at. And I would love to not have any more for a long, long time. But yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I guess how do you bring in more body of Christ into that too?
I think so. And play around with my boundary idea. Like, your answer went to not having the resources to do that, but I don't know. Keep playing with that because you're going to need to carve out something. I'm not real happy with my answer to your question. I give it a B minus. But if y'all have any other ideas, like help me help her out, but I don't know. You got one?
She also has 5 kids.
Okay, good.
Well, I just wanted to say that my kid's a little bit older than yours, and I just, when you said this, it was me like that when they were so little. Now they're a little bit older. Now they all will be in school at some point, and then you will have a lot of silent moments. Really, like, it's going to happen. It's just not yet. So it's coming, and it's going to be amazing.
By school, do you mean college? Because we do homeschool some of them.
So you homeschooled them?
A couple of them, yeah.
Okay, all right. All the more reasons to be thinking about boundaries in space that you'll need to carve out more artificially. Since natural school is a boundary that's created by the culture, it will be all the more important to create structure for those kids. If you have one kid, you can let them sleep in your bed. If you have 5, you need to put them in a pen, you know, just like there's more management, you know, like that. Anyway,
It's true.
thank you for your question. Like I say, I'm not totally happy with my answer, but I gave it a shot. Right, yes, ma'am.
I wanted to tell her, when should I use the microphone?
Yeah, Katie, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
When my kids are in their 40s now, but when they were like 9 and 11, about 8 of us got together and we were all struggling, and we had a weekly meeting and we read a parenting book, How to Really Love Your Child. That was very famous back in the 80s, and it really helped us. We shared stories and cried together, and it really made a difference.
Cool. Thank you. Body of Christ at work. Yes, sir. Get started, and I'm coming over to you.
All right, I don't know if it's so much of a question, but just an idea that just came to me. Everybody's all excited about this.
Aren't they, though?
So I'm a pilot, and we do this thing called a threat forward briefing every flight.
What do you fly?
737 commercial.
Oh, cool.
Not Delta. So
Good, good.
So,
I flew United 737.
well, we've
the other
also
day.
been late for you then, yeah.
Yeah, right.
So, I was just thinking though, I wonder if I could apply this threat forward briefing to our marriage.
All right, what does threat forward mean? Does that mean?
So it's identifying any risks or conflicts that could happen. So I'll say, you know, we discuss, how are you feeling personally? Did you get enough rest? Are you fatigued? Is your little square going to be a little bit bigger because you're just tired or hungry? How's the jet? How's the weather? What situation are we going into that's different today? So I might be able to come home and say, okay, before I walk in the door, am I tired? Am I grumpier? Am I needing some silence first? What situation am I walking into? What's she dealing with? So a little bit of a threat forward briefing so that I can
Threat forward briefing. I think I'm going to write
mitigate
that
the
down.
risk, and just come up with some sort of like pre-engagement framework just to sort of mitigate the risks and not let that little square dominate.
All right, well, I've flown a lot in my life. I mean, like as a pilot.
Okay.
But I'm a dangerous pilot because you're much more left brain than me. Like what you just said was so frontal lobe and cognitive and structured. And that's why you would be a better pilot than me. Because I tend to, you see me, I'm more right brain, emotional, intuitive, right? What you just said was a beautiful left brain version of what I would call going bird's eye. In other words, a lot of the value of a therapist or the value of a marriage conference is backing up and being able to go perspective, fly on the wall. How am I feeling? What is going on with me? See, that's what saved me from going home to Norma all drained that night, is I did a threat forward briefing. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna start using that. That awareness of what am I bringing in, what do I not have, what does she not have, that awareness, that objectivity is so valuable to keep you just from falling in the same dumb dance over and over again. So I think you just put good pilot language on what I would call going bird's eye and that objectivity, that perspective. Let's talk about flying during one of our breaks or something. Go ahead, yeah. Check my phone. Nope, y'all are pretty open. Anything else? One of the nice things about being a therapist is that you learn to become comfortable with long periods of silence. So I'm good as y'all decide.
I'm not asking for, this isn't my situation, but what do you say to people when they do have a spouse that is not like open to changing? Like you have this, hang on, difficult people. So like an unrepentant spouse. What do you, will you talk about that tomorrow?
I'll talk about it tomorrow, but I'll also talk about it now in a different sense. Tomorrow is going to be a little bit more about dealing with people who don't want to change and they're jerks. But what about people who just aren't interested in, you know, all this psycho, whatever it is, growth stuff? It's like me. Okay, let's talk about that. That's a good question. I joke with my colleagues that actually some of the best marriage therapy I do is individual therapy with one of the spouses if the other spouse won't come. And the reason that works, it kind of surprised me originally when I saw it work. But the reason it works is because marriage is a system. Marriage is a dance. Marriage is like a baby mobile. I mean, think about a baby mobile. You got like little strings and like little sticks and like little Noah's Arks or something hanging from the baby mobile, right? Well, what happens to the baby mobile if you like cut off one of the Noah's Arks? The whole baby mobile shifts, right? And the same thing happens in marriage. One of the things that I've seen a lot is one spouse will come to therapy, and maybe it's not a difficult person. Maybe their spouse isn't really hurtful, though they can be, and we'll talk about this tomorrow. But maybe they're just like, I don't want to do therapy, whatever. You're into that, I'm not into that, whatever. If you grow, if you shift the dynamics of your own little square, if you shift the dynamics of how you respond, it shifts the whole baby mobile. And what's kind of crazy about it is you'll actually see their spouse start to change and their spouse won't even know or know why. It's just that if you stop hitting the tennis ball back, the game ends pretty quick. In other words, you're part of a system. And if you know, I often say this in the other marriage conference, many of you might be here by yourself and you know your spouse is not interested in whatever. Don't despair, because if you do grow yourself, like I said earlier, what am I a greater expert on, my stuff or theirs? If I just grow myself, it'll change the system. It's really cool, and I can't even explain exactly all why. But I think part of it is, I think it's a God thing. Like if we live the 3 R's, relate righteously regardless. If I live in a position where I'm following Christ and wanting to live according to the way that he has called us to be, people can't live around somebody who's mirroring Christ and not change. It's going to affect them. But that begins with us saying, okay, I'm going to stop being in a position of why won't they, whatever, and start being in a position of, okay, I'm going to look at my own growth. And the minute you do that, you can change the whole system. Does that make sense?
Do you think that also works with family members?
What about brothers who are going to show up tonight? Oh, yeah, the brother. That was so 20 minutes ago. All right. If the family member is a difficult person, which we will define more tomorrow. In other words, I'm jabby, I'm snarky, I'm critical, I have a little edge, I have blah, 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 and we do John Cox Jedi training techniques on them, yes, they will change. 90% of the times they will. It's really cool. It's why I like this talk. It's like kind of powerful. So, when do they come? Do we have to, are you going to be here tomorrow? Like, listen to it on the podcast on the way home. It's like, all right, let's wrap it up. Okay. All right. Remember I started out warning you guys? This is one of the hardest conferences I do, and I'm talking really frankly with you about how I actually think as a therapist. This is not a conference that was designed to say, hey, let's get some church members in and give them some tips on their marriage. I pushed y'all in this, so I applaud y'all in that you let me kind of take you down the rabbit hole in that. We'll do more rabbit holing tomorrow, but I find this to be a very challenging talk that I did, and so thank you for staying engaged with it and let me stretch you there. Can I pray for us and wrap us up? Sir?
Yes.
All right. Father, we are broken and we are limited, and in order to be more whole, we have to work this hard. Like, we have to stretch and use PowerPoint slides and handouts and trying to develop wisdom and gentleness and safety and softness and strength. We worship you that you don't have to do that it is in your very nature to be all of these things, that you are the source of wholeness for us, that you are the source of intimacy and closeness and of identity and power and of forgiveness and safety and imperfection, and that you ground us in the safety of whatever it is we feel. Thank you for being with us tonight. I pray for this group. I pray for the marriages represented here, that you would bless them and care for them and bring us all back safe in the morning. In Christ's name, amen.